When federal agents stormed Mercyvale Hospital at dawn with arrest warrants for Cincinnati's most powerful medical family, every news outlet wanted the same answer. How did a quiet night shift nurse bring down a corruption empire worth $200 million? The truth started 6 weeks earlier, with a slap that echoed through a trauma bay like a gunshot. Dr. Victor Kane's hand cracked across Elena Reeves' face hard enough to snap her head sideways, blood blooming on her split lip. He grabbed a fistful of her dark hair, wrenched her head back, his whiskey breath hot against her cheek. "You don't question me," he snarled in front of a dozen frozen staff members. "You're a fucking temp nurse. I'm a surgeon. Remember your place." Elena went perfectly still. Not from fear, from training. Because the disposable nurse Kane just assaulted was Major Elena Reeves, decorated Army combat surgeon who'd performed emergency procedures under mortar fire and never flinched once. And Kane had just made the fatal mistake men like him always make. He assumed quiet meant weak. Before we dive into how one slap triggered the destruction of an entire corruption network, I need you to do something. Stay with me until the very end of this story. If you want to see how a woman they tried to break became the force that broke them, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's story can travel. Now let's go back to the beginning. 6 weeks before the federal raid that would dominate national headlines, Elena Reeves was exactly what Mercyvale Hospital's administration wanted her to be. Invisible. She worked the overnight shift in the cardiac wing, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the rotation nobody else wanted because it meant weekends, holidays, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from being perpetually out of sync with the rest of the world. She moved through fluorescent-lit corridors with practiced silence, her footsteps barely audible on industrial tile that had seen 40 years of trauma, triumph, and the grinding machinery of institutional healthcare. The other nurses knew her as quiet, professional, competent enough to handle her assignments, but never pushing for more responsibility, never volunteering for committees, never making waves. She'd been at Mercyvale for 3 months and had successfully avoided attention from anyone who mattered. That was deliberate. After 8 years of military service, 3 combat deployments, hundreds of emergency surgeries performed in field hospitals while mortars fell and bullets snapped through canvas walls, Elena had left the Army searching for a different kind of purpose. Something quieter. Something that didn't require constant vigilance against threats that could materialize from any direction. Civilian nursing seemed like the answer. Same medical skills, same focus on patient care, but without the adrenaline spike of wondering if the next convoy would hit an IED or if the supply helicopter would make it through hostile airspace. She'd been catastrophically wrong about the quiet part. "Nurse Reeves," Dr. Victor Kane's voice cut through the 2 a.m. stillness of the medication room where Elena was preparing IV antibiotics for a patient recovering from cardiac surgery. "My office. Now." Elena's hands paused over the medication cart, her mind already running tactical assessments that were supposed to be unnecessary in civilian life. Kane's tone carried the particular edge that meant trouble. She'd heard it twice before in her 3 months at Mercyvale, both times directed at other nurses who'd made the mistake of questioning his clinical decisions. She followed him down the corridor toward the administrative wing, maintaining the careful neutrality she'd perfected over years of military service. Never show emotion, never give them leverage. Stay professional, regardless of provocation. Kane's office smelled like expensive cologne attempting to mask the underlying scent of whiskey. He sat behind his mahogany desk, inherited from his father, who'd been chief of surgery before him, part of a family legacy that stretched back 40 years at Mercyvale. Flanking him were Dr. Patricia Morse, the hospital's chief of surgery, and Helen Carver, head of nursing, the trinity of power at Mercyvale Hospital, and all 3 were looking at Elena like she was a problem requiring elimination. "Close the door," Kane said. Elena complied, her peripheral vision automatically cataloging exits, potential weapons, threat assessment, old habits from war zones that civilian life hadn't managed to erase. "We've reviewed the incident report you filed 2 days ago," Dr. Morse began, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of delivering bad news with a sympathetic smile. "Regarding the patient you felt should not have been discharged, We have some serious concerns about your judgment and your understanding of appropriate scope of practice. Elena kept her expression neutral. The patient returned to the ER 6 hours after discharge with a massive pulmonary embolism that nearly killed him. My assessment was correct. My documentation followed proper protocol. Your assessment, Kane said, each word sharp with contempt, overstepped your authority as a nurse. You're not a physician. We don't pay you to second-guess clinical decisions made by doctors with years of training and experience. I documented concerns as required by hospital policy when I observed symptoms consistent with deep vein thrombosis. The patient's subsequent medical crisis validated those concerns. You undermined a senior physician's authority, Helen Carver interjected, her pen tapping against her clipboard with mechanical precision. You created liability issues for the hospital. You made the entire care team look incompetent in front of other staff members. Elena's fingers curled slightly at her sides, the only outward sign of the anger building behind her carefully maintained calm. The patient code said otherwise. He would have died at home if that embolism had broken loose 12 hours later instead of 6. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Are you being insubordinate right now? Kane stood, using his 6-foot height to create physical intimidation. Because I can make your life extremely difficult here, Reeves. You're a temp employee, no union protection, no seniority, one bad evaluation from me and you'll never work in a decent hospital again. Is that a threat, doctor? It's a reality check. He moved around the desk, stepping into her personal space with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never faced consequences for boundary violations. You want to survive at Mercy Vale? Learn to shut your mouth and follow orders. Nobody likes a nurse who thinks she's smarter than the physicians. Elena held his stare, her combat training automatically tracking his movements, assessing his balance, noting the slight sway that suggested he'd been drinking before this meeting. And nobody likes a doctor who prioritizes ego over patient safety. The slap came fast, a backhanded strike that snapped her head to the side and split her lower lip against her teeth. The metallic taste of blood flooded her mouth. Dr. Morse gasped. Helen Carver looked away, her face pale. Elena slowly turned back to face Kane, blood trickling down her chin, her dark eyes tracking him with the kind of intensity that came from years of treating combat casualties and holding dying soldiers who begged her to save them. No tears, no fear, just cold, precise assessment of a threat. Kane's hand was still raised, his face flushed with rage and something else. The dawning realization that she hadn't reacted the way she was supposed to. She hadn't cowered, hadn't apologized, hadn't given him the satisfaction of breaking. "Get out of my office," he said, his voice shaking. "You're suspended pending investigation into your insubordination and professional misconduct." Elena collected her bag without a word, moving with the controlled precision of someone executing a tactical withdrawal rather than a retreat. She walked past Dr. Morse, who couldn't meet her eyes, past Helen Carver, whose hands trembled as she gripped her clipboard. Behind her, as the door closed, she heard Carver's shaky voice. "Victor, what the hell were you thinking? If she files assault charges—" "She won't," Kane interrupted with the confidence of someone who'd gotten away with it before. "They never do. Too afraid of losing their jobs, their references, their careers. She'll take the suspension, maybe file a complaint that goes nowhere, and eventually she'll disappear like all the others." Elena stood in the corridor for exactly 3 seconds, tasting blood, feeling the ache in her jaw where his hand had connected. Then she pulled out her phone and took a photograph of her face. Split lip, blooming bruise, blood staining the collar of her scrubs. Documentation, evidence, the first step in any tactical operation. She walked toward the break room to clean up, passing a nurse's station where the overnight staff pretended to be busy with charts while stealing glances at her injured face. News would spread through the hospital within the hour. Another nurse who'd questioned Dr. Kane and paid the price. In the break room, Jamie Chen was restocking supplies, her young face reflecting the kind of exhaustion that came from working doubles to pay off crushing student loan debt. She looked up as Elena entered, her expression shifting from tired to horrified. "Oh my God, what happened?" "Dr. Kane." Elena moved to the sink, wetting paper towels to clean the blood from her face. "You took exception to my incident report about the patient who came back with a PE." Jamie's hand stilled on the supply cabinet. He hit you? Yes.
But she spots.
Are you going to report it? Press charges? Elena studied her reflection in the mirror, split lip, bruise already darkening on her cheek, the cold fury in her eyes that came from years of seeing good people crushed by systems designed to protect power instead of people. If I press charges, what happens? Jamie's silence was answer enough. He's got family money, hospital connections, legal teams on retainer, Elena continued, her voice flat. I'm a temp nurse with 3 months at this facility. The hospital will protect him, discredit me, make me unemployable. That's how this works. So he just gets away with it. Jamie's voice cracked with something between anger and despair. Like he always does. Elena turned away from the mirror. How many others has he done this to? Physically hit? I don't know for sure, but verbally abuse, intimidate, retaliate against? At least a dozen nurses I know of, maybe more. Jamie set down the supplies she'd been holding. People file complaints. Nothing happens. HR tells us to work it out professionally. Administration says it's he said, she said. Anyone who pushes too hard gets reassigned to terrible shifts or has their contracts terminated for vague performance issues. And everyone just accepts it. What choice do we have? Jamie's exhaustion went deeper than physical fatigue. It was the bone-deep weariness of fighting battles you knew you'd lose. We need our jobs. We need references. We need to eat and pay rent. Standing up to doctors like Kane means destroying your career for the satisfaction of being right while unemployed. Elena zipped her bag closed, her tactical mind already shifting from assessment to strategy. Thanks for checking on me. Elena, wait. Jamie caught her arm as she moved toward the door. I know you're probably thinking about walking away, and I wouldn't blame you. But if you decide to fight this, if you decide to make noise about what happened, some of us would back you up. Quietly, maybe. In ways that won't get us immediately fired. But you should know you're not alone in this. Elena studied the younger nurse's face, seeing the fear and hope warring behind her eyes. I'll keep that in mind. She made it halfway to the parking garage before her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Rachel from HR. We need you to sign some paperwork regarding your suspension. Please come to the administrative wing immediately. Elena changed direction, taking the back stairs to the 3rd floor, where human resources occupied a suite of offices that smelled like carpet cleaner and institutional disappointment. Rachel Gutierrez was waiting with a folder thick enough to indicate this wasn't a simple suspension. Have a seat, Ms. Reeves. Rachel's voice carried the mechanical quality of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. The severance agreement was already printed, every clause designed to strip Elena of rights and recourse. Immediate termination instead of suspension. No references, no unemployment eligibility. A non-disclosure agreement requiring her signature in exchange for 2 weeks severance pay. Barely enough to cover rent while she searched for another position. Elena read through the document with the careful attention she'd once given to mission briefings where the details meant the difference between success and soldiers coming home in body bags. You're terminating my employment for filing an incident report about a patient safety concern, she said, her voice carrying no inflection. We're ending your temporary contract due to documented performance issues and workplace disruption. Rachel's eyes never left her script. The NDA is standard protocol. You sign, you receive severance pay, you refuse, you leave with nothing, and will contest any unemployment claim you file. Doctor, Kane assaulted me less than an hour ago. There were no witnesses to any alleged assault. It's your word against a senior physician's. The hospital stands behind its medical staff. Elena looked at the NDA, at the clauses preventing her from discussing her employment, from filing complaints with medical boards, from using Mercyvale as a reference, from speaking publicly about anything she'd witnessed during her 3 months at the facility. The legal language was designed to erase her completely, to make sure the assault and the retaliation never existed outside this office. She picked up the pen. Rachel visibly relaxed. Then Elena set the pen down without signing. No. Excuse me? I'm not signing. Elena stood. You want to fire me? Fine. But I'm not going to help you cover up assault and patient endangerment by agreeing to legal silence. Rachel's professional mask cracked, frustration bleeding through. You're making a catastrophic mistake, Doctor. Kane has connections across this entire city. His family sits on boards at 3 other major hospitals. You'll never work healthcare in Cincinnati again if you fight this. Maybe not in Ohio. That sounds like illegal retaliation. That sounds like realistic consequence. Rachel leaned forward, dropping any pretense of sympathy. Let me be very clear, Ms. Reeves. You're nobody. A temp nurse with 3 months at one facility and no local connections. Dr. Kane is Cincinnati medical royalty. His father was chief of surgery here for 20 years. His family has donated millions to this hospital. When you walk out of here without signing that NDA, you're choosing professional suicide over common sense. Then I'm choosing professional suicide. Elena walked toward the door. Wait. Rachel's voice shifted, taking on an almost pleading quality. Just think about this for 1 second. Sign the paper, take the money, move to another city and start over. That's the smart play. Smart. That's survival. Elena paused at the door, looking back at the HR director, who'd probably delivered this same speech to dozens of other nurses who'd made the mistake of reporting abuse or neglect or retaliation. How many people have you convinced to sign away their rights to protect this hospital? Rachel's silence was confirmation enough. The parking garage was nearly empty at 4 a.m., Elena's 10-year-old Honda sitting under a flickering light that cast everything in sickly yellow tones. She was 3 steps from her car when footsteps echoed behind her. Nurse Reeves. She recognized Dr. Kane's voice without turning around. Heard you refuse the severance, he continued, his footsteps getting closer. That's profoundly stupid. Really, incredibly stupid. Elena kept walking. You think you're brave? You're not. You're just another nobody who doesn't understand how the world works. His hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around with enough force to demonstrate he wasn't concerned about additional assault charges. I'm actually trying to help you here. Take the deal. Sign the NDA. Disappear. Because if you try to fight this, if you go to lawyers or medical boards or make noise in any way, I will personally destroy what's left of your pathetic career. Elena looked down at his hand on her shoulder, then back at his face. Remove your hand. Or what? Kane laughed, his grip tightening hard enough to bruise. You'll file another complaint? Tell another supervisor. Nobody cares, sweetheart. You're disposable, temporary, meaningless. The training Elena had spent 18 months trying to suppress came flooding back. Distance assessment, threat evaluation, tactical response options. She'd disarmed hostile combatants in war zones. She'd performed combat takedowns on enemy soldiers. She'd been trained by the best special operations instructors the U.S. military had to offer. And Dr. Victor Kane had just made the mistake of putting his hands on her a second time. The move was so fast, Kane didn't register it happening. One moment he was gripping her shoulder, the next he was face down on the concrete, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that sent white-hot pain shooting through his nervous system, Elena's knee pressing into his spine with professional precision. I said, Elena's voice was utterly calm, almost conversational. Remove your hand. You crazy bitch, Kane struggled, but the pressure increased instantly, perfectly calibrated to control without causing permanent damage. I'll have you arrested. Assault. Battery. You're finished. Self-defense, Elena corrected, her voice carrying the same clinical detachment she'd used when treating casualties who screamed and fought against necessary medical interventions. You grabbed me first. Security cameras will confirm your initial aggression. This is a controlled response to neutralize an ongoing physical threat. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. You want to threaten me, Doctor? Go ahead. But understand something. I'm not afraid of you, not even slightly. I've held dying soldiers while mortar rounds fell on our position. I performed emergency surgery with enemy combatants 50 meters from our perimeter. You're just a drunk doctor with ego problems and family money. You don't scare me. Elena released him and stepped back, her hands visible and non-threatening. Kane scrambled to his feet, his expensive suit jacket torn, his face purple with rage and humiliation. You're done. Completely finished. I'll make sure you never work in healthcare again. The emergency alert cut him off, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the parking structure and meant every available medical professional needed to respond immediately. Code blue. Mass casualty incoming. All hands on deck. Elena was already moving, her training overriding everything else. Behind her, she heard Kane following, both of them running toward the ER entrance because whatever had just happened, people needed medical care and personal conflicts became irrelevant in the face of actual emergency. The ambulance bay was controlled chaos when they arrived. Two gurneys crashed through the doors simultaneously, paramedics shouting over each other about a shooting on the interstate, multiple casualties, one critical who'd coded twice during transport. Male, approximately 40, multiple GSWs to chest and abdomen. The lead paramedic's voice carried over the noise. BP crashing, resp shallow. We lost pulse twice and got him back. But he's circling. Elena's hands moved automatically, helping transfer the patient to the trauma bed. The man's face was gray, his chest barely moving despite maximum oxygen support. Massive internal bleeding, minutes left at best. Doctor. Kane shoved past her, taking command of the trauma bay. Get me a chest tube kit and 4 units O negative. Prep for emergency thoracotomy. Move. Elena was already pulling equipment, her eyes scanning the patient's presentation with the analytical precision that came from hundreds of combat surgeries. Something was wrong. The breathing pattern didn't match standard gunshot trauma. The chest movement was asymmetrical, the trachea deviating slightly to the right, jugular veins distending. Tension pneumothorax, she said clearly, her voice cutting through the chaos. Left side. He needs immediate needle decompression before you do anything else. Kane didn't even look at her. I can see what I'm doing. Prep for surgical intervention. Doctor, there's no time for surgery. Look at the tracheal deviation, the jugular distension. He's got air trapped in the pleural space, creating pressure that's... I didn't ask for your fucking opinion. Kane spun on her, his face still flushed from their parking garage confrontation. You're not even supposed to be in this hospital. Security! Get her out of my trauma bay. Elena looked at the patient, at the monitor showing oxygen saturation dropping into the 70s, at the asymmetrical chest rise that was getting worse with each labored breath, at the trachea being pushed further off center by building pressure. Every second of delay meant more pressure, more cardiac compromise, closer to total circulatory collapse. Standard hospital protocol said defer to the attending physician. Chain of command said, follow Kane's orders regardless of her assessment. Professional survival said, walk away and let him own the outcome. The monitor's tone shifted from urgent beeping to the long, flat scream of asystole. Time of death, 4:47 a.m., Kane announced, stepping back from the table with the kind of detachment that came from years of insulating himself from consequence. Elena moved. Her hands found the needle decompression kit, 14-gauge catheter, already prepped because she'd seen this coming 30 seconds ago. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the anatomical landmark she'd hit hundreds of times in field hospitals when every second counted and mistakes meant soldiers died. The needle went in at the precise angle, the exact depth, with the confidence of someone who'd performed this procedure under mortar fire while blood soaked through her surgical gloves. The rush of escaping air was audible, trapped pressure releasing, collapsed lung reinflating, cardiac function no longer compromised by crushing force against the heart. The monitor beeped. Once. Twice. A rhythm returning from flatline death. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Kane grabbed her arm, wrenching her away from the patient with enough violence to send her stumbling backward. You just performed a medical procedure without authorization. That's practicing medicine without a license. The patient's oxygen saturation climbed. 75, 80, 85. Heart rate establishing stable rhythm. Blood pressure recovering from terminal collapse. The ER went absolutely silent. Every nurse, every tech, every resident who'd watched Elena save a patient's life while the attending physician declared him dead was now staring at the monitors showing impossible revival. Security! Kane's voice cracked with rage. I want this woman removed from my hospital immediately. And I want police called. She's committed assault and she's practiced medicine without a license. I want her arrested. 2 security guards appeared, both looking profoundly uncomfortable. They knew Elena from months of overnight shifts, had shared coffee and small talk during quiet 3 a.m. hours. But Dr. Kane was screaming orders, and hospital politics always favored physicians over everyone else. Ma'am, the older guard said, unable to meet her eyes, we need you to come with us. Elena didn't resist. She let them escort her out of the trauma bay, past nurses who suddenly found their charts fascinating, past residents who pretended to be busy elsewhere. Behind her, she heard Dr. Kane's voice, shaky now that adrenaline was fading. "Get me hospital administration immediately. And get legal on the phone. I want her charged with everything. Assault, battery, practicing medicine without a license, every possible violation we can think of." The security office was a windowless room that smelled like burnt coffee and institutional resignation. They sat Elena in a plastic chair and called the Cincinnati Police Department because Dr. Kane was demanding criminal charges and hospital administrators were falling over themselves to comply. The responding officer was young, maybe 30, with the exhausted expression of someone working the graveyard shift who'd rather be anywhere else. He listened to the hospital's legal counsel deliver Kane's statement via speakerphone, his expression growing progressively more skeptical. "So let me make sure I understand," the officer said when the lawyer finished. "She performed an emergency procedure that saved a patient's life, and you want her charged for that?" "She performed a medical procedure without authorization from the attending physician." The lawyer's voice carried the smug certainty of someone billing $400 an hour. "She was already terminated from her position for insubordination and workplace violence. She then returned to a restricted medical area and practiced medicine without a license. We're requesting immediate arrest and prosecution." "And the patient she treated?" Silence on the other end of the phone. "The patient whose life she saved," the officer pressed. "What's his status?" "Stable," the lawyer admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't change the fact that she violated—" "What about the assault allegation? You mentioned she committed workplace violence." "Dr. Kane has confirmed that she physically attacked him in the parking garage approximately 30 minutes before this incident." The officer pulled up security footage on his tablet, reviewing clips that showed the parking garage confrontation. His expression shifted as he watched. "Sir, this footage shows Dr. Kane grabbing the suspect first, shows him making unwanted physical contact. Her response appears to be defensive restraint." The officer looked at Elena with new interest. "Ma'am, what's your background?" "Major Elena Reeves, United States Army Medical Corps, combat surgeon, 3 deployments." The room's temperature changed. "And the procedure you performed tonight?" "Needle decompression for tension pneumothorax. Standard emergency intervention within my scope of practice as a military medical officer. The patient would have died without it." The officer made some notes, then addressed the phone. "I'm not seeing grounds for arrest here. Your physician initiated unwanted physical contact. That's assault. The suspect's response was measured defensive action. As for the medical procedure, if she's a trained military surgeon and the patient was dying, that sounds like an emergency medical intervention rather than practicing without a license." "Officer, you don't understand the serious—" "I understand perfectly, sir." The officer's voice carried the edge of someone who dealt with entitled institutions before. "You can file whatever civil complaints you want, but I'm not arresting someone for saving a life. If you have further concerns, contact the county prosecutor's office." He ended the call and looked at Elena. "You're free to go, but I'd suggest getting a lawyer. They're going to come after you through civil channels." Elena stood. "Thank you, officer." "Don't thank me yet. These people have money and connections. This isn't over." "I know." She walked out of the security office, out of Mercyvale Hospital, into the gray pre-dawn light of a Cincinnati morning. Her phone was already buzzing with calls from the hospital's legal department, but she ignored them, walking to her car with the slow, measured pace of someone who'd just crossed a line and knew exactly what was coming. In her pocket, her personal phone held one contact she hadn't used in 18 months. A number she'd sworn she'd never call again because calling it meant admitting that civilian life hadn't worked, that she couldn't escape who she'd become through years of military service, that some battles followed you home regardless of how far you ran. Elena sat in her car, watching the sunrise paint Cincinnati's skyline in shades of orange and gold, and made the call. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "This better be important. It's 5 a.m. "Colonel Sanders, this is Raven 6. Elena used her old military call sign, the one that meant combat surgeon attached to special operations units. "Requesting immediate extraction and legal intervention, code black." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds, the time it took a career military officer to shift from sleep to combat alertness. Location? Mercyvale Hospital, Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm currently facing false criminal charges and civil litigation. Primary hostile is Dr. Victor Kane, assault, retaliation, systematic patient endangerment. Secondary hostiles include hospital administration and legal counsel. Status of the patient you treated? Stable. Successful needle decompression for tension pneumothorax. Patient was declared dead by attending physician. Intervention was necessary and appropriate. Patient survived. Identity of patient? Elena paused. She didn't know who the gunshot victim was, just another casualty who'd needed help and gotten it despite institutional obstruction. Unknown civilian, she said. Male, approximately 40, multiple GSWs, critical presentation. Stand by. Elena heard keyboard typing, rapid commands being issued to unseen personnel. When Sanders came back on the line, her voice carried new urgency. Elena, the patient you saved is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, Special Operations currently on classified assignment. You just saved a critical military asset. This changes everything. Ma'am? Exfil team is mobilizing now. ETA 30 minutes. Do not sign anything. Do not make any statements to local authorities. Do not leave your current position. Sanders' voice shifted from commander to something almost protective. You've been off-grid for 18 months. No contact with command. And now you surface by saving one of our most valuable operators while facing assault from corrupt civilian medical staff? It wasn't planned, Colonel. It never is with you, Major. Sanders' tone carried something between exasperation and pride. Sit tight. We're coming to get you. And Elena? The people who thought they could intimidate you are about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you assault federal military personnel. The call ended. Elena sat in her car watching Mercyvale Hospital's morning shift arrive. Nurses and techs streaming through the entrance, most clutching travel mugs and looking half asleep, completely unaware that their quiet night shift colleague had just triggered a chain of events that would destroy the hospital's most powerful family and expose 2 decades of systematic corruption. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jamie Chen. OMG. Everyone is talking about what you did. Patient is stable and asking who saved him. Administration is freaking out. Are you okay? Elena typed back. I'm fine. Going to be away for a few days. If anyone asks, tell them the truth. I did my job. 30 minutes later, exactly as promised, 3 black SUVs with federal plates pulled into the parking garage. The lead vehicle stopped next to Elena's Honda, and Colonel Rebecca Sanders stepped out in full Army uniform, her expression carrying the kind of controlled fury that came from learning one of her officers had been assaulted. Behind her emerged 2 MPs and a man in civilian clothes who Elena recognized as JAG, Military Legal Counsel. Major Reeves. Sanders' voice was all business, but her eyes did a quick assessment looking for injuries. You're coming with us. Your vehicle will be secured and transported to Fort Harrison. You're under military protection as of this moment. Elena stood, feeling something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. This was familiar ground. Chain of command. Institutional backing. People who understood that competence and courage mattered more than politics and money. Yes, ma'am. They drove north toward Fort Harrison in convoy formation, Sanders briefing Elena on the situation as Cincinnati's skyline disappeared behind them. Lieutenant Colonel Webb is stable and being transferred to military medical facilities. His team is very interested in meeting the surgeon who saved his life. But Elena... Sanders' expression shifted to something grimmer. What you walked into is bigger than one assault. We've been monitoring Mercyvale Hospital for 6 months based on complaints from military families about substandard care. What you've just given us is a decorated combat surgeon assaulted by staff, false charges filed to cover it up, and evidence of systematic patient endangerment. How big are we talking? Federal investigation big. Department of Defense is very interested when military personnel can't receive adequate care at civilian facilities. And when that inadequate care appears to be enabled by institutional corruption? Sanders smiled grimly. Let's just say some very important people are about to have a very bad day. Elena watched the highway miles pass, processing implications. She'd walked into Mercyvale Hospital wanting a quiet nursing job. She was leaving as the catalyst for what sounded like a federal investigation into healthcare corruption. "I just wanted to treat patients," she said quietly. "I know. But you're a warrior, Elena. You see threats, you assess options, and you act. That's not something you can turn off because you're wearing scrubs instead of combat fatigues." Sanders pulled up a file on her tablet. "The question is, are you ready to fight? Because what's coming next won't be easy. The Kane family has money, connections, political influence. They're going to come at you with everything they have." Elena thought about the nurses at Mercyvale who absorbed abuse in silence, about patients whose concerns were dismissed because doctors' egos were too fragile to admit uncertainty, about every person who'd been crushed by systems designed to protect power instead of people. "I'm ready," she said. "Good." Sanders made a call, her voice shifting to command mode. "This is Colonel Sanders. Activate full investigation protocols. I want every complaint filed against Mercyvale Hospital reviewed. I want Dr. Victor Kane's medical history, personnel file, and disciplinary record. And I want federal prosecutors briefed within the hour." As the convoy pulled through Fort Harrison's gates, Elena saw soldiers conducting morning PT, vehicles moving with military precision, the American flag visible from miles away. This was a different battlefield than the trauma bays and hospital corridors she'd been fighting in, but the principles were the same: accountability, justice, refusing to accept that corruption was just the cost of functioning in complex systems. Behind them in Cincinnati, Dr. Victor Kane was about to learn that the quiet temp nurse he'd assaulted wasn't just a combat surgeon. She was a force that, once activated, didn't stop until the mission was complete. And his mission, his comfortable existence built on abuse and institutional protection, was about to end in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The war had just begun. And this time, the wrong side fired the first shot. The command center at Fort Harrison buzzed with coordinated intensity that reminded Elena of pre-mission briefings before combat operations. Sanders led her into a secure conference room where 4 people were already waiting, their expressions carrying the focused determination of professionals who'd just been handed a high-priority case. "Major Reeves, meet your team," Sanders said. "Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. Special Agent David Moreno, DOD Inspector General. Captain James Morris, JAG Course. And you already know me." Elena took in the assembled firepower with tactical appreciation. "This escalated quickly. The moment you saved Lieutenant Colonel Webb, this became a federal matter," Agent Chen said, pulling up files on the room's main display. "Military asset endangered by negligent civilian medical care. That triggers DOD oversight. But what really caught our attention was the pattern of complaints we found when we started digging." The screen filled with documentation. Incident reports, patient complaints, staff grievances, all filed against Mercyvale Hospital over the past 5 years. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Nurses reporting unsafe practices, families questioning treatment decisions, patients suffering complications that look suspiciously like preventable errors. Chen highlighted clusters of complaints, and every single one was either dismissed, buried, or resulted in the complainant being terminated or reassigned. "Systematic suppression," Elena said, recognizing the pattern from her own experience. "More than that, organized corruption." Moreno pulled up financial records. "We've been investigating irregularities in pharmaceutical contracts across multiple Ohio hospitals for 18 months. Mercyvale kept appearing in connection with Kane Medical Supply, a distribution company owned by Richard Kane, Dr. Victor Kane's father." Sanders leaned forward. "Explain the connection." "Kane Medical Supply has exclusive distribution contracts with 6 major hospital systems in Ohio and Kentucky. Those contracts are worth approximately $43 million annually. The contracts were negotiated while Richard Kane sat on hospital boards and medical oversight committees." Moreno's expression hardened. "That's textbook conflict of interest." "But it gets worse. The hospitals buying from Kane Medical Supply pay 20 to 30% above market rates for pharmaceuticals." "Kickbacks," Elena said. "We suspect so, but proving it requires documentation we haven't been able to access. Hospital administrators have been extremely protective of their financial records." Moreno pulled up another file. Until now. Your assault by Dr. Kane gives us probable cause to subpoena everything: personnel files, financial records, communications between hospital leadership and Kane Medical Supply. Captain Morris, the JAG officer, set a thick folder on the conference table. From a legal standpoint, Dr. Kane committed assault on a federal military officer. That's a crime we can prosecute under federal jurisdiction. But more importantly, it gives us leverage to investigate the entire institutional structure that enabled and protected his behavior. How many others has he assaulted? Elena asked. Chen pulled up a list that made Elena's stomach tighten. Documented complaints of physical intimidation against 12 staff members over 7 years. Verbal abuse documented in at least 40 separate incidents. Sexual harassment allegations from 3 nurses that were settled quietly with NDAs. And the hospital knew. The hospital protected him. Richard Kane's family has donated over $15 million to Mercyvale in the past 20 years. They've funded entire wings, purchased equipment, endowed medical positions. That kind of money buys institutional loyalty. Chen's voice carried barely controlled anger. They bought silence. They bought protection. They bought the ability to assault staff members without consequence. Sanders stood, moving to the window overlooking Fort Harrison's parade ground. Here's what's going to happen. Agent Chen and Special Agent Moreno are opening a formal federal investigation into corruption at Mercyvale Hospital and related institutions. Captain Morris is preparing criminal charges against Dr. Victor Kane for assault on a military officer. And I'm coordinating with the Surgeon General's office to review every complaint filed by military families about inadequate civilian medical care. What's my role? Elena asked. Right now, stay safe and let us build the case. Sanders turned back to face her. But eventually, you're going to testify. You're going to tell your story publicly. And you're going to help us dismantle a system that's been crushing people for decades. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Jamie Chen at Mercyvale. They're calling an emergency staff meeting. Administration is freaking out. Someone said federal agents are coming. Elena showed the message to Sanders, who smiled grimly. Good. Let them panic. Panicked people make mistakes. The next move came faster than Elena expected. Within 2 hours, federal agents arrived at Mercyvale Hospital with warrants for documentation and authority to interview staff. Elena watched via video feed as the operation unfolded, administrators scrambling to comply, lawyers arriving in expensive suits, news vans parking outside when word leaked that something major was happening. And through it all, Dr. Victor Kane remained defiant, his lawyers already spinning the narrative that he was the victim of government overreach triggered by a disgruntled former employee with mental health issues. He's going to claim you're unstable, Morris warned, reviewing the defense strategy Kane's legal team had already begun implementing. Combat veteran with PTSD who overreacted to normal workplace correction. They'll suggest your military service left you paranoid and aggressive. Let them try, Elena said. I underwent full psychological evaluation before leaving active duty, clean bill of health, regular counseling as part of standard protocol. My mental health has never been questioned by actual qualified professionals. They'll still try. They'll find people willing to question your judgment, especially regarding high-stress medical decisions. Morris pulled up Elena's service record. 3 combat deployments. Hundreds of emergency surgeries. You've made life and death decisions under fire. They'll find cases where patients died despite your intervention and suggest you have a pattern of poor judgment. Elena had expected this. Every operation I participated in was reviewed and approved. Every patient death was documented with appropriate medical and tactical justification. If they want to weaponize my service record, they're going to find out that transparency works both ways. Sanders received a call and stepped out of the conference room. When she returned 3 minutes later, her expression had shifted to something between satisfaction and concern. Lieutenant Colonel Webb is awake and asking to meet you. He wants to thank the person who saved his life. They walked to Fort Harrison's medical facility, a modern hospital that served active duty personnel and veterans. Webb was in a private recovery room, monitors showing stable vitals, his color already better than the gray death pallor Elena had seen in Mercyvale's trauma bay. He was also clearly special operations, the kind of lean, hard fitness that came from extreme physical training, the watchful eyes that tracked every person entering his room, the immediate tactical assessment of his surroundings despite being in a hospital bed. "Major Reeves," he said as Elena entered, "they tell me you're the reason I'm not in a body bag right now." I did what any competent surgeon would do: recognized tension pneumothorax and performed emergency decompression, against direct orders from the attending physician, while facing termination and assault charges, knowing it would destroy your civilian career. Webb studied her carefully. That's not standard medical care. That's courage under fire. Elena pulled up a chair. "What happened? How does a special operations officer end up in a civilian ER instead of military medical facilities?" Webb's expression shifted to something guarded. "Can't give you operational details, but I was meeting a contact near the riverfront when things went wrong. Shots fired. I took 2 rounds before my team could respond. Closest trauma center was Mercy Vale, and time was critical. Your team wanted to extract you to Fort Harrison. Paramedics said I wouldn't survive transport, so we took the risk on civilian care." Webb's jaw tightened. "And got Dr. Kane. How much do you remember?" "Pieces. The ER lights, someone yelling that I was dead. Then you, calm, focused, doing what needed to be done despite everyone screaming at you to stop." He paused. "I've worked with combat medics in some of the worst situations imaginable. You operated like one of them. Why'd you leave the service?" Elena considered how much to share. "I wanted something quieter. Thought civilian nursing would let me use my skills without the constant threat of violence." "How'd that work out?" "Not well." Webb almost smiled. "Yeah, I can see that. Listen, my team wants to help. Legal support, security, whatever you need. We protect our own, and you're one of us now, whether you want to be or not." Before Elena could respond, Sanders appeared in the doorway with news that changed everything. "We have a problem. Dr. Kane just held a press conference." They rushed back to the command center where someone had pulled up the live feed. Richard Kane. Doctors. Victor Kane's father, pharmaceutical executive, hospital board member, stood at a podium flanked by lawyers and looking every inch the concerned parent, defending his maligned son. "My son has dedicated his life to saving patients," Richard Kane said, his voice carrying practiced emotion. "He's a skilled trauma surgeon who's worked at Mercy Vale Hospital for 15 years. And today he's being targeted by a disgruntled former employee who has made baseless accusations because she couldn't handle being corrected for dangerous medical decisions." Elena watched the performance with clinical detachment. "The woman making these allegations was terminated for cause after 3 months of documented performance issues," Richard Kane continued. "She repeatedly overstepped her authority, questioned physicians with far more training and experience, and created dangerous situations for patients. When my son attempted to address her unprofessional behavior, she became physically aggressive and then filed false assault charges to avoid accountability." "That's a lie," Elena said quietly. "Of course it's a lie," Sanders agreed. "But he's good at this. Very good." Richard Kane's voice strengthened. "What we're witnessing is a troubling abuse of federal power. Military authorities are using their jurisdiction to harass civilian medical professionals based on accusations from someone with documented mental health issues stemming from combat trauma. This isn't justice, it's persecution." The press conference continued with Kane positioning himself as a victim of government overreach, his son as a dedicated physician being destroyed by false accusations, and Elena as an unstable veteran whose PTSD made her a danger to herself and others. When it ended, the command center fell into strategic silence. "He's playing the victim card," Chen observed. "Classic wealthy defendant strategy. Paint yourself as the target of unfair prosecution while subtly destroying the accuser's credibility." "The mental health angle is particularly insidious," Morris added. "He's not directly saying you have PTSD, but he's implying it strongly enough that public perception will make that connection." Elena's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you can destroy my family? You're nobody. Walk away now or we'll bury you." She showed it to Sanders without comment. "Forward that to cybercrimes," Sanders said immediately. "We'll trace the source. That's witness intimidation, which makes this even worse for them." Agent Chen's phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, and her expression went dark. "We have another problem. Helen Carver, The head of nursing who witnessed Kane's assault on you? She just called her lawyer asking about witness protection. Says she's being threatened. By who? Elena asked. She won't say. But she sounds terrified. Claims someone told her that cooperating with federal investigators would be very bad for her family's health. Sanders made a decision. Bring her in. Full protective custody. If they're threatening witnesses this early, they're desperate. Within an hour, Helen Carver was being transported to Fort Harrison under federal protection. Elena watched through one-way glass as the head of nursing sat in an interview room, her hands shaking as she clutched a coffee cup. She's terrified, Elena observed. She should be, Chen said. She witnessed a federal crime and has documentation that could support criminal charges. That makes her a valuable witness and a target. Elena entered the interview room alone. Carver looked up, her expression shifting from fear to something like shame when she saw who'd walked in. I know you have no reason to help me, Carver began, her voice trembling. I stood there and watched him hit you. I did nothing. I've watched him abuse staff for 3 years, and I did nothing because I was protecting my job, my pension, my comfortable life. Elena sat down across from her. Tell me about the threats. I got a call this morning. A man's voice, didn't recognize it. He said if I cooperated with federal investigators, if I gave testimony or documents, my daughter would have an accident on her way home from school. Carver's composure cracked completely. She's 8 years old. They threatened an 8-year-old child. Did you recognize the voice? Any background noise that might help identify location? No, it was professional, like he'd done this before. Carver pulled a flash drive from her purse with shaking hands. I've been keeping records for years. Insurance, in case the Kane family ever turned on me. Personnel files showing documented complaints against Dr. Kane. Email chains where administration discussed suppressing incident reports. Financial records showing payments to staff who signed NDAs. Elena took the flash drive. Why now? Why come forward after years of silence? Because they threatened my daughter. Because I'm 57 years old and I've spent the last decade enabling abuse because I was afraid of losing my job. Because you had the courage to fight back and I didn't. Carver's voice broke. I just want my daughter safe. I'll give you everything. Testify, cooperate, whatever you need. Just please protect my family. Sanders and Chen joined them, taking over the interview while Elena stepped out to review the flash drive's contents. What she found was worse than she'd imagined. 20 years of systematic corruption documented in meticulous detail. Carver had kept copies of everything. Incident reports that were buried, email chains coordinating cover-ups, financial payments to silence complaints, board meeting minutes where patient safety concerns were dismissed as threats to hospital revenue. But one folder made Elena's blood run cold. A file labeled Martinez Problem, containing emails from 3 years ago discussing how to discredit and force out Dr. Sofia Martinez, a resident physician who'd been documenting Dr. Kane's medical negligence. Elena pulled Sanders aside. We need to find Dr. Martinez. If she was targeted 3 years ago for the same thing I did, she might have additional evidence, or she might be in danger. Sanders made calls while Elena continued reviewing documentation. The corruption network was vast. Not just Mercyvale Hospital, but connections to pharmaceutical companies, insurance providers, medical equipment suppliers, all coordinating to maximize profit while suppressing any oversight that might threaten revenue streams. Found her, Sanders said. Dr. Sofia Martinez, currently working at Cincinnati General Hospital. She's agreed to meet with us, but she's scared. Says she's been watching what happened to you and knows they'll come after her if she speaks up. They arranged a secure meeting at Fort Harrison for the next morning. But at 0300 hours, Elena was awakened by Sanders with devastating news. Someone just ran Jamie Chen off the road, hit and run. She's alive but in critical condition at Riverside Memorial Hospital. Elena was moving before conscious thought caught up, pulling on clothes, her mind already running combat scenarios. Details. Black SUV, no plates, forced her Honda off Route 50 around midnight. Witnesses say the SUV never slowed down, just disappeared onto side roads. Jamie's car rolled twice before hitting a tree. Sanders' expression was grim. Initial assessment shows multiple fractures, internal injuries, possible spinal damage. She's in surgery now. This wasn't an accident. No, this was a message. Cooperate with us and bad things happen. They raced to Riverside Memorial, arriving to find Jamie Chen already out of surgery but in intensive care. The young nurse who'd shown Elena kindness, who'd offered to back her up quietly, was now fighting for her life because she'd been associated with someone who refused to stay silent. Dr. Sarah Kimball, the surgeon who'd operated on Jamie, pulled Elena aside. She's stable but critical. We repaired internal bleeding, set multiple fractures, and she's going to need weeks of recovery. But Elena? Kimball's expression shifted to something darker. I ran a full toxicology panel as a precaution. She has elevated levels of pharmaceutical-grade anticoagulants in her system, levels way above anything that could be accidental. Someone dosed her before the accident. That's my assessment. Made sure any injuries would bleed more severely, made sure minor trauma could become life-threatening. Kimball's voice hardened. This wasn't just attempted murder made to look like an accident. This was attempted murder designed to maximize suffering. Elena stood at the window of Jamie's ICU room, watching monitors track her vitals, and felt the last of her hesitation burn away. These people had escalated from intimidation to violence, from threatening careers to threatening lives. Sanders joined her at the window. We're upgrading security for all witnesses. Martinez gets protective custody immediately. Everyone who's cooperated with the investigation gets offered relocation if they want it. That's not enough, Elena said quietly. They're going to keep attacking until we're all too scared or dead to testify. We need to go on offense. What are you suggesting? Total transparency. Every piece of evidence we have, every witness statement, every financial record, make it all public. If everything's already out there, they can't threaten people with exposure. Sanders considered this carefully. That could compromise prosecutions. Defense attorneys will claim we poisoned the jury pool. They're already claiming that. They're already attacking my credibility and threatening witnesses. At least if everything's public, their intimidation loses power. Elena turned from the window. These people have operated in darkness for 20 years. They've relied on silence and fear to maintain control. What happens when we turn on every light and refuse to be quiet? Chen arrived with news that made the decision easier. We traced the threatening call to Carver, burner phone, but we tracked the purchase to a security firm that specializes in discrete problem resolution for corporate clients. The firm has connections to Kane Medical Supply through shell companies. They're using professional criminals to intimidate witnesses, Moreno said. That's conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and now attempted murder. We have enough to bring RICO charges. So Sanders made a call to the Department of Justice, arguing for immediate action. The conversation was heated, with Sanders' voice carrying the controlled fury of someone watching good people get hurt, while bureaucrats worried about procedural perfection. When she hung up, her expression had shifted to something Elena recognized from pre-combat briefings. We're going public. Full evidence dump. Every document, every witness statement, every financial transaction. The Attorney General is holding a press conference in 6 hours. The next 6 hours were a blur of coordination and preparation. Federal prosecutors reviewed evidence. Public affairs officers prepared media strategies. Witness protection teams secured everyone who'd cooperated with the investigation. And at 900 Eastern Time, the Attorney General stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. and detonated the entire Kane family empire. Today, the Department of Justice is announcing indictments in what we believe is one of the largest healthcare corruption cases in recent history, the Attorney General began. These indictments are the result of an 18-month investigation into systematic fraud, patient endangerment, and witness intimidation spanning multiple states and involving hundreds of millions of dollars. The evidence dump hit the internet simultaneously, a searchable database containing thousands of documents showing the scope of corruption. News organizations downloaded everything and began their own investigations. Academic researchers started analyzing patterns. Healthcare workers used the documentation to file complaints about their own institutions. Within hours, the narrative had shifted completely. Richard Kane's careful positioning as a victim collapsed under overwhelming evidence of systematic corruption. Dr. Victor Kane's assault on Elena was revealed as part of a pattern of abuse protected by family money. The pharmaceutical contracts that had enriched the Kane family were exposed as fraudulent schemes that had cost hospitals and taxpayers millions. And most damaging of all, the patient stories. Families who'd lost loved ones to preventable medical errors that were covered up. nurses who'd been terminated for reporting unsafe conditions, physicians who'd been forced out for questioning incompetent colleagues. Elena watched the coverage from Fort Harrison, seeing her own story become part of a larger narrative about institutional corruption and the people who fought back against it. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Major Reeves, this is Dr. Sofia Martinez. I saw the news coverage. I want to testify. I have documentation of Dr. Kane's negligence going back 4 years. I have patient files, incident reports, everything they tried to make me bury. And I'm done being scared. By the end of the day, 7 more healthcare workers from Mercyvale had come forward with similar stories. 2 from other hospitals where the Kane family had influence. 3 pharmaceutical company employees willing to testify about kickback schemes. The dam had broken. The culture of silence that had protected corruption for decades was collapsing under the weight of collective courage, inspired by people who refused to stay quiet. Sanders found Elena in the command center watching news coverage. You started something. This isn't just about Mercyvale anymore. This is about every hospital where power protects incompetence, where money buys silence, where good people get crushed for speaking truth. I just wanted to save a patient. You did. And in doing so, you showed thousands of other people that fighting back was possible. Sanders pulled up social media analytics showing the explosion of support for healthcare reform. Nurses across the country are sharing their stories. Patients are demanding accountability. Politicians are scrambling to position themselves on the right side of this. Elena's phone buzzed with another message, this time from a number she recognized, Jamie Chen, awake and texting from her ICU bed. Saw the news. We're winning. Don't stop. But the next message, from an unknown sender, reminded Elena that winning battles didn't mean the war was over. Your friend survived this time. Dr. Martinez won't be so lucky. We know where she lives. We know her route to work. We know everything. Last chance to walk away. Elena forwarded it to Sanders and Chen without comment. They're desperate, Chen said, reviewing the message. Desperate enough to threaten violence even after we've exposed their network. That makes them dangerous. Where's Martinez now? Elena asked. Safe house? Federal protection? 24/7 monitoring. Sanders pulled up security feeds showing Martinez in a secured location. She's as protected as we can make her. At 2100 hours, those protections proved insufficient. The federal agents guarding Martinez were found unconscious in the hallway outside her room, both drugged with professional-grade sedatives. Martinez's room was empty, signs of struggle evident, the window standing open to cold November air. A rope anchored to the radiator disappeared over the windowsill. 3 stories down, fresh tire tracks scarred the parking lot pavement. Sanders' phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression went absolutely cold. We have a photo message sent to multiple investigators simultaneously. The image showed Dr. Sofia Martinez bound to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, her face bruised, her eyes wide with terror. And standing behind her, partially visible in the frame, was a figure holding what appeared to be a medical syringe. The accompanying text was brief. Trade. Major Reeves for Dr. Martinez. Alone, coordinates to follow. You have 2 hours or she dies screaming. Elena looked at the photo of the terrified physician who'd only wanted to report medical negligence, who'd been targeted and suppressed for years, who'd finally found the courage to speak up and was now paying the price. Sanders grabbed her arm before she could move. Absolutely not. We don't negotiate with— They're not negotiating, Elena interrupted, her voice carrying the cold precision of tactical assessment. They're eliminating threats. Martinez has evidence. Jamie Chen survived their first attempt. I'm the public face of the investigation. They're desperate, and desperate people don't think strategically. They lash out. Her phone buzzed with new coordinates. An abandoned industrial complex near the Cincinnati riverfront, the same area where they'd found the burned-out SUV that had been used to attack Jamie Chen. Then another message. Come alone. Military response equals she dies. Police involvement equals she dies. You show up alone equals she lives, and you can play hero one more time. Moreno pulled up satellite imagery of the location. Abandoned factory complex, multiple buildings, terrible lighting, dozens of entry points. It's a perfect ambush site. Of course it is. Elena studied the layout with combat veteran's eyes. Which is why I'm not going in blind. Sanders shook her head. This is a trap designed to kill you both. We send in tactical teams, extract Martinez, and prosecute whoever's behind this. And if Martinez dies while we're planning the perfect operation? Elena looked at Sanders. I've been in worse situations. Forward operating bases under enemy fire. Field hospitals with hostile combatants 50 meters from the perimeter. I know how to operate in hostile environments. That was war. This is war, Elena interrupted. They just attacked a federal witness, drugged federal agents, and are threatening murder. The only difference between this and combat is the location. Morrison arrived with tactical gear and a plan that was simultaneously reckless and the only option that might work. We equip you with communications and tracking devices. You go in as requested, alone, unarmed in appearance. But we position tactical teams outside engagement range, ready to move on your signal. You stall, gather intelligence, stay alive until we can execute extraction. And if they search me for wires? You'll have a subdermal tracker, nearly impossible to detect without medical equipment, and a panic trigger in your clothing that looks like a normal button but sends an immediate distress signal. Elena nodded slowly. Do it. The next 90 minutes were spent preparing for an operation that violated every tactical principle Elena had learned in military service. Never go into hostile territory alone. Never surrender the element of surprise. Never give enemies the advantage of choosing the battlefield. But Martinez's life depended on compliance with demands designed to get Elena killed. So she'd comply, while building in every advantage she could create. Sanders fitted her with the communication devices, her expression carrying the weight of sending someone she cared about into mortal danger. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. There isn't another way, not one that gets Martinez back alive. Elena checked the equipment, noting how it was concealed in her civilian clothes. I've survived worse odds. You've had teams backing you up in worse situations. And I'll have teams backing me up tonight, just from a distance. At 22:47 hours, Elena drove alone toward the industrial complex, following coordinates that led to Cincinnati's decaying waterfront where factories had once employed thousands and now stood as rusting monuments to economic collapse. Her phone buzzed with final instructions. Loading dock, east side. Come alone or she dies. Elena parked under a failing streetlight and stepped out of the vehicle, hands visible, no obvious weapons. The November wind cut through her jacket, carrying the scent of river water and industrial decay. She walked toward the loading dock, her training automatically assessing her surroundings. Multiple concealment positions, numerous ambush points, at least 3 different escape routes if things went wrong. I'm here, she called out, her voice carrying across the empty lot. Where's Martinez? For 10 seconds, nothing. Then a figure emerged from the shadows of the loading dock, and Elena's tactical assessment went into overdrive. Not Richard Kane, not Dr. Victor Kane. Helen Carver stood in the weak light, holding a pistol with the awkward grip of someone unused to firearms, her expression carrying the desperate fear of someone in way over her head. And stepping out behind her, moving with the confident precision of someone who'd planned every detail, was Dr. Patricia Morse, Mercy Vale's chief of surgery, the woman who'd sat silent while Elena was assaulted, who'd helped suppress complaints and protect incompetence for years. I'm disappointed, Major Reeves, Morse said, her voice carrying the same clinical detachment Elena had heard 1,000 times in operating rooms. I really thought you'd be smart enough to walk away, but here we are. Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her concealed panic trigger, but she stopped herself. Where's Martinez? Close by, still alive for now. Whether she stays that way depends entirely on your cooperation. Morse gestured to Carver, whose hand shook as she kept the pistol trained in Elena's general direction. Helen here is going to make sure you don't do anything heroic while we have a conversation about how this is going to end. Elena's earpiece crackled with Sanders' barely audible voice. Thermal imaging shows 3 additional heat signatures in the building behind you. Stay calm. Teams are moving into position. But Elena was already calculating options, assessing threats, preparing for the moment when conversation would shift to violence, and she'd need to act with the speed and precision that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. because the people who thought they could intimidate her into silence had just made their final mistake. They'd brought a hostage to a negotiation with someone trained to never leave casualties behind. And Dr. Patricia Morse, standing in that abandoned industrial complex with hired security and desperate plans, was about to learn that the quiet nurse she'd dismissed as disposable was actually the most dangerous person she'd ever underestimated. Elena's combat training cataloged threats with automatic precision: Carver with the pistol at 12 meters, inexperienced grip suggesting minimal firearms training, hands shaking enough to make accurate shooting unlikely. Morse at 15 meters, unarmed but positioned behind Carver as human shield, tactical positioning suggesting military or professional security consultation. 3 additional heat signatures in the building meant backup, likely the professional contractors Chen had traced to Kane Medical Supply. "Where's Martinez?" Elena repeated, keeping her voice level. "Safe enough for the moment," Morse replied, stepping slightly to the side to get a clearer view. "Unlike you, Dr. Martinez understood the value of cooperation. She provided very useful information about federal investigation timelines before circumstances became unpleasant for her." Sanders's voice crackled in Elena's earpiece. "Stall. We need 2 more minutes to position breaching teams." Elena shifted her weight slightly, creating better angles for potential movement. "You're not here representing the Kanes. This is something else." Finally, she starts thinking tactically. Morse's clinical detachment never wavered. The Kane family are useful idiots who got caught because Victor couldn't control his temper and Richard thought money solved everything. But they were never the actual operation. They were middle management in a much larger enterprise. Kane Medical Supply isn't just a pharmaceutical distributor. It's one revenue stream in a network that generates approximately $200 million annually across 6 states. Hospital consulting contracts, pharmaceutical kickbacks, medical equipment procurement, insurance optimization, all coordinated through shell companies and consulting firms that make institutional corruption look like standard business practice. Elena's mind raced through implications. MedSource International. Morse smiled without warmth. "Thomas Garrett sends his regards. He's very disappointed that you couldn't be more reasonable about this situation. Mercyvale was a profitable arrangement until you decided to play hero and save a patient who should have been someone else's problem." Lieutenant Colonel Webb, a special operations officer on classified assignment who had the profound misfortune to get shot near a hospital where Dr. Kane was having a bad night. Morse pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. "If you just let nature take its course, none of this would have been necessary. One patient dies from trauma complications. No one asks questions, and everyone continues their profitable arrangements. Instead, I saved his life and exposed your corruption network. You triggered a federal investigation that threatens billions in revenue across multiple states. That kind of disruption requires correction." Morse gestured to Carver. "Helen, if the major moves, shoot her. Doesn't have to be fatal, just incapacitating enough that we can administer the sedative." Carver's gun hand trembled worse. "Patricia, you said we were just going to scare her. You said no one else would get hurt." "Plans evolve based on circumstances. Major Reeves and Dr. Martinez both need to disappear in a way that looks like tragic suicide. 2 witnesses overwhelmed by the pressure of a federal investigation, unable to cope with scrutiny." Elena saw the trap's full scope now. Make their deaths look like mental breakdown, cast doubt on all their testimony, potentially collapse the entire investigation by discrediting key witnesses. "You really think people will believe we killed ourselves?" They believed Helen Carver kept documentation for insurance purposes instead of as leverage for blackmail. They believed Dr. Kane's assault on you was an isolated incident instead of systematic abuse. They'll believe whatever narrative we construct, especially when supported by professional forensic staging. Morse took a step closer. "You made this personal when you refused the severance agreement. You could have taken the money, disappeared, and everyone would have moved on. Instead, you activated military resources and triggered federal intervention that's already cost my organization $40 million in seized assets and destroyed contracts." Sanders' voice, 30 seconds. Get down when you hear the flashbangs. Elena needed to keep Morse talking, needed to position herself away from Carver's line of fire, needed to create chaos that would give the tactical teams clean entry points. Your organization is finished regardless of what happens to me. The evidence is public. Witnesses are protected. Federal prosecutors have everything they need. They have circumstantial financial records and testimony from frightened nurses. Without you and Martinez, their star witnesses, the case becomes significantly weaker. Add in questions about witness reliability, unstable veterans, suicide pacts, documented mental health issues, and suddenly reasonable doubt becomes very achievable. Morse held up the syringe. This is pharmaceutical-grade sedative. You'll be unconscious in seconds. When you wake up, you'll be restrained in a vehicle at the bottom of the Ohio River. Tragic accident, 2 federal witnesses dead, investigation compromised. And Carver? What happens to her after she helps you murder 2 people? Morse glanced at the trembling head of nursing. Helen becomes another tragic suicide, overwhelmed by guilt for her role in the corruption, unable to live with her complicity. Very sad. Very tidy. Carver's face went white. You said I'd be protected. You said my daughter would be safe if I helped you. Your daughter will be safe. You, unfortunately, represent a loose end that needs resolution. Morse's tone remained clinically detached, discussing murder like a surgical procedure. I did warn you that cooperation with federal investigators would have consequences. You chose to provide them with documentation. That choice has natural conclusions. The pistol in Carver's hand wavered, no longer pointed at Elena, but drifting toward Morse with the dawning horror of someone realizing they'd been manipulated into their own execution. Elena saw the shift and moved instantly, diving left as Carver's gun discharged, the shot going wide, concrete exploding where Elena had been standing. She rolled behind a rusted support beam as the building erupted with movement. The 3 contractors Morse had positioned inside responding to the gunshot. Sanders' voice, "Go! Go! Go!" Flashbang grenades detonated with disorienting thunder, brilliant light turning night into temporary day. Elena's training kicked in. She'd kept her eyes closed during the flash, preserving her night vision. Her hands already moving toward the support beam's jagged edge, where rust created a makeshift cutting surface. Tactical teams crashed through multiple entry points simultaneously, their movements coordinated with precision that came from hundreds of hours of close-quarters combat training. Spotlights blazed across the industrial complex, voices amplified through speakers. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. Get on the ground." One of Morse's contractors made the intelligent choice, dropped his weapon immediately, and went prone, hands visible. The second tried to run and made it approximately 4 meters before a tactical team member took him down with a less lethal round. The third pulled his weapon and died when he pointed it at federal agents who responded with the kind of overwhelming force that ended threats permanently. Morse grabbed Carver, using her as a human shield, the syringe pressed against Carver's neck. "Stay back! I'll kill her!" Elena emerged from cover, assessing the new tactical situation. Morse had positioned herself behind Carver with professional competence, using the terrified nurse's body to block clear shots. The syringe against Carver's carotid artery was a credible threat. Whatever was in that needle would render Carver unconscious or dead within seconds. Sanders appeared with her sidearm drawn, flanked by tactical team members. "Drop the syringe. Release the hostage. There's no scenario where you walk away from this." "There's a scenario where I take someone with me," Morse countered, pressing the syringe harder against Carver's neck. "Back off, or I'll inject enough sedative to stop her heart." Elena circled slowly, drawing Morse's attention, creating angles for the tactical teams. "You said this was about money and corruption, about protecting a profitable network. Killing Carver accomplishes nothing except adding murder to your charges. It accomplishes eliminating a witness who can testify about tonight's activities." Morse's clinical detachment finally cracked, desperation bleeding through. "I've spent 20 years building this system, 20 years of careful corruption, strategic positioning, profitable arrangements. I'm not going to let one sanctimonious combat surgeon destroy everything because she couldn't accept that some battles aren't worth fighting. Every battle is worth fighting when it's about protecting people from predators like you." Morse's hand tightened on the syringe. Elena saw the decision forming, saw the commitment to a final desperate act. She fired twice, precise shots that hit Morse's shoulder and weapon hand, forcing her to drop the syringe and release Carver, who collapsed, sobbing, to the concrete. Tactical team members swarmed Morse, securing her with practiced efficiency while medics rushed to assess Carver's condition and treat Morse's gunshot wounds. Sanders moved to Elena's side. "Where'd you get the weapon?" "Borrowed it from the contractor who surrendered." Elena handed over the pistol she'd taken during the chaos of the flashbang assault. "He wasn't using it anymore." "That's not standard protocol." "Neither is letting a murderous surgeon inject hostages with lethal sedatives." Elena turned toward the building where thermal imaging had shown additional heat signatures. "Martinez is still in there. 3rd floor, northeast corner based on the floor plan. We need to move now." They cleared the building room by room, standard tactical progression, until they found Martinez in a stripped office, bound to a chair, face bruised, but conscious and breathing. "It's over," Elena said, cutting the restraints. "You're safe." Martinez collapsed against her, shaking. "They said they were going to make it look like suicide, said everyone who talked ended up dead." "Not anymore." Elena helped her stand, supporting her weight. "Not ever again." Paramedics arrived within minutes, professional and efficient, checking Martinez for serious injuries while giving preliminary treatment for shock and minor trauma. Morse was loaded into an ambulance under armed guard, her shoulder wound serious but non-fatal, her career and freedom both ending in the back of that vehicle. The hired contractors were separated and processed, each one immediately requesting lawyers and refusing to make statements. Standard criminal behavior that wouldn't save them. Morse's recorded confession combined with the attempted kidnapping and murder gave prosecutors overwhelming evidence. But as the scene was being secured, as federal agents swarmed the industrial complex collecting evidence and documenting the attempted murder, Sanders received a call that changed the tactical situation completely. "That was Agent Chen," Sanders said, her expression grim. "She just got word that Richard Kane and his legal team are filing emergency motions to dismiss all charges. They're claiming the evidence was obtained illegally, that we violated his constitutional rights, that the entire investigation is tainted by prosecutorial misconduct." "They're throwing everything at the wall hoping something sticks," Elena said. "More than that, they're preparing a counteroffensive. Lawsuits against you personally, against every federal agent involved in the investigation, against the military for supposed overreach. They're trying to bankrupt the prosecution through legal costs and delay." Elena looked at the industrial complex where Morse had planned to murder 2 witnesses to protect a corruption network worth hundreds of millions. Let them sue. We have evidence, witnesses, and bodies. No amount of expensive lawyers changes that. Bodies? Sanders pulled up a report on her phone. The contractor who was killed tonight? Turns out he was wanted in connection with 3 other suspicious deaths. Healthcare workers who'd filed complaints against institutions connected to MedSource International. All ruled suicides or accidents, all coincidentally dying before they could testify. Elena felt cold fury crystallize in her chest. How many people did they kill to protect this? We're still counting, but preliminary evidence suggests at least a dozen suspicious deaths over the past 8 years. Nurses, physicians, patients' family members, anyone who threatened to expose the corruption. The magnitude of it settled over Elena like physical weight. This wasn't just institutional corruption or white-collar crime. This was organized murder spanning years, enabled by money and protected by people who treated human lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of profit. Her phone buzzed with a message from Morrison. "Dr. Victor Kane just posted bail. He's out." Elena showed it to Sanders, whose expression went hard. Son of a bitch. Federal prosecutors opposed bail, but some judge granted it anyway. Probably someone with Kane family connections. So he's free while Martinez is in protective custody and Jamie Chen is still recovering from attempted murder. For now, but Elena? Sanders hesitated. Kane knows you're the reason his entire world is collapsing. His career is over, his family's reputation destroyed, his father facing decades in prison. Men like that, when they've lost everything, become unpredictable. You think he'll come after me? I think he's dangerous, desperate, and has nothing left to lose. That's the worst combination possible. They transported Martinez to Fort Harrison's medical facility for full examination and treatment. By the time Elena arrived back at the base, it was nearly 0400 hours, and she'd been awake for over 24 hours of continuous tactical operations. But sleep wasn't an option. Morrison had called an emergency briefing to assess the night's events and plan next steps in an investigation that had just escalated from corruption to murder conspiracy. The command center was crowded with federal agents, military investigators, prosecutors, and media relations specialists trying to manage the exploding public interest. News of the attempted kidnapping and murder had leaked within hours, adding fresh fuel to coverage that was already dominating headlines. Status report, Morrison began without preamble. Agent Chen? We have Dr. Patricia Morse in federal custody charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, and obstruction. She's cooperating partially, giving us information about MedSource International's operations in exchange for consideration on sentencing. Based on her testimony, we've identified 47 individuals across 6 states who participated in the corruption network. Arrests? 14 so far. More coming as we verify evidence and secure warrants. Thomas Garrett, MedSource CEO, is among those in custody. His lawyers are already filing every motion possible to suppress evidence and delay prosecution. Expected. What about the Kane family? Richard Kane is in federal custody without bail. Too much flight risk given his resources. Dr. Victor Kane made bail this morning despite prosecutorial opposition. He's under electronic monitoring, but otherwise free pending trial. Morrison turned to Elena. Major Reeves, you've become the face of this investigation, whether you wanted to or not. Media is calling you everything from hero to vigilante. Politicians are demanding hearings. Patient advocacy groups want you to lead reform efforts. How do you want to handle public engagement? Elena considered carefully. I want to testify. Congressional hearings, federal trials, wherever my testimony helps build accountability. But I'm not interested in being a celebrity or leading movements. I'm a surgeon who reported assault and negligence. That shouldn't require heroism. It should be standard procedure. Agreed. But the reality is you've inspired thousands of healthcare workers to come forward with their own stories. We're being flooded with complaints, documentation, testimony from people who've been silent for years. Your example gave them permission to speak up. Sanders pulled up social media analytics showing the explosion of support and criticism. You're also becoming a target for people who benefit from the status quo. We're seeing organized disinformation campaigns claiming you're mentally unstable, that you fabricated evidence, that you're part of some political conspiracy against healthcare institutions. Let them lie. We have evidence that speaks for itself. Evidence doesn't always overcome narrative, Chen warned. Richard Kane's legal team is already seeding stories about government overreach, about how military authority was abused to persecute civilian medical professionals. They're positioning you as the aggressor and the Kane family as victims. Then we counter with truth, with testimony from witnesses they tried to murder, with documentation of systematic corruption spanning 20 years. Elena's voice hardened. They want to make this about me versus them? Fine. Let's make it about accountability versus corruption, about protecting patients versus protecting profits. Those are battles I'm happy to fight publicly. Morrison nodded slowly. Congressional hearings are scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. Senate Health Committee wants you as lead witness. They're calling it an investigation into systematic corruption in healthcare delivery and pharmaceutical distribution. I'll be there. It's going to be brutal. Hostile senators, aggressive questioning, attempts to discredit you on national television. The Kane family's lawyers will be feeding questions designed to make you look unstable or vindictive. I've testified under oath in military tribunals while being cross-examined by defense attorneys trying to prove war crimes. I can handle senators with political agendas. Dr. Kimball entered the command center, her expression carrying news Elena had been dreading. Jamie Chen just coded, massive pulmonary embolism. We're working on her now, but Kimball's professional composure cracked. Someone dosed her with procoagulants, elevated levels consistent with pharmaceutical-grade blood clotting agents. The car accident created trauma, and the drugs ensured that trauma would produce fatal complications. Elena was moving before conscious decision, running toward the medical facility with Sanders close behind. They arrived to find Kimball directing an emergency team with controlled intensity, Jamie's vitals crashing on monitors while nurses worked in synchronized precision. She needs embolectomy, Elena said, her combat surgery training automatically diagnosing. Surgical removal of the clot before it causes total cardiac arrest. OR is being prepped now, but Elena, Kimball met her eyes. Even if we succeed, the coagulants in her system mean she's at extreme risk for additional clots. She'll need intensive monitoring for weeks, possibly months. They wheeled Jamie toward the operating room at controlled speed, monitors beeping urgent warnings. Elena stood in the corridor watching them disappear, feeling the weight of consequence settle like crushing pressure. Jamie Chen was 26 years old, drowning in student debt, working double shifts to survive. She'd shown Elena kindness when everyone else pretended not to see assault. She'd offered to back her up quietly, in ways that wouldn't immediately destroy her career. And now she was fighting for her life because someone decided that witnesses needed to be eliminated. Sanders pulled Elena away from the surgical wing. "We need to talk about security. Yours specifically." "I'm fine." "You're a target. Morse tried to kill you tonight. The Kane family has every motivation to make you disappear. And now we have evidence of a professional assassination network that's been murdering witnesses for years." Sanders' voice carried command authority. "You're getting 24/7 protection. No arguments." "I don't need—" "That wasn't a request, Major. You're a federal witness in a case involving murder conspiracy and institutional corruption worth hundreds of millions. Keeping you alive isn't optional. It's operational necessity." Elena wanted to argue, but recognized the tactical logic. Dead witnesses couldn't testify. Intimidated witnesses couldn't fight. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You killed my son's career. You destroyed my family. You turned the whole world against us. There will be consequences." R.K. Richard Kane, texting from federal custody, still believing his money and connections would ultimately protect him from accountability. Elena showed the message to Sanders, who immediately forwarded it to federal prosecutors as additional evidence of witness intimidation. But the next message, arriving 60 seconds later, came from a different number and carried implications that made Elena's blood run cold. "They killed my friend. They tried to kill Jamie. They're going to keep killing until everyone's too scared to testify, unless someone stops them permanently. I know where Victor Kane is right now. Interested?" Anonymous. Elena stared at the message, understanding instantly what was being offered. Vigilante justice, extrajudicial execution, the kind of permanent solution that would end the threat but destroy everything the legal investigation was trying to achieve. She deleted the message without responding. Sanders saw her expression. "What?" "Someone just offered to help me solve the Victor Kane problem outside legal channels." "Did you—" "Deleted it. We're not vigilantes. We're building a case that survives legal scrutiny and creates lasting institutional change. Murder would feel satisfying for about 10 seconds and then undermine everything we're trying to accomplish." "Good answer. But Elena—" Sanders pulled her aside, voice dropping. "That message means someone's tracking Kane's movements. Someone with resources and motivation to kill him. That's a problem even if you're not involved." "You think it's someone from MedSource trying to eliminate liability? Or someone whose family member died from suppressed negligence and wants revenge? Or a healthcare worker who's been victimized and sees no other option?" Sanders made calls, coordinating with Kane's monitoring team to increase security. Either way, if Victor Kane gets killed before trial, the defense will claim we couldn't protect witnesses and use his death to create doubt about the entire investigation. Elena's exhaustion was finally catching up, adrenaline from the night's combat operations fading to leave behind the crash that always followed sustained tactical engagement. Sanders noticed and made an executive decision. "You're getting 8 hours of sleep, mandatory. Your protective detail will secure your quarters, and I don't want to see you until at least 1,300 hours. Jamie Chen is in the best possible hands with Dr. Kimball. You can't help her by collapsing from exhaustion." "Sleep, Major." "That's an order." Elena wanted to protest but recognized when arguments were futile. She walked to temporary quarters under escort from 2 MPs who positioned themselves outside her door with the kind of professional vigilance that came from guarding high-value assets in hostile territory. She managed 4 hours of restless sleep, interrupted by combat nightmares and scenarios where she failed to save patients who died screaming her name. When she finally gave up on rest at 0900 hours, Her phone showed 73 missed calls, over 200 text messages, and enough email to crash most civilian servers. The news coverage had metastasized overnight. Her recorded statement about healthcare corruption had gone viral, viewed millions of times across multiple platforms. Patient advocacy groups were organizing protests. Nursing unions were demanding reform. Politicians were scrambling to position themselves on various sides of an issue that crossed traditional political lines. And buried in the deluge of messages was one from Agent Chen, marked urgent. Need you in command center immediately. We have a problem. Elena arrived to find the center in controlled chaos, multiple screens showing news coverage that had shifted from supportive to catastrophic. Richard Kane's legal team had released a counter-narrative supported by carefully edited video footage and testimony from physicians claiming Elena had a pattern of aggressive behavior and questionable medical judgment. They're good, Chen said, pulling up the attack ads that were already saturating media markets. Very good. They found 3 cases from your military service where patients died despite your intervention. They're framing those deaths as evidence of incompetence rather than the reality of combat medicine. Elena watched her service record being weaponized, surgical decisions made under mortar fire being second-guessed by people who'd never treated casualties in war zones. They're also claiming you have PTSD, Morrison added, pulling up psychiatric evaluations that had somehow been leaked despite being confidential medical records, suggesting that combat trauma makes you paranoid, aggressive, and unreliable as a witness. Those evaluations cleared me for continued service and eventual discharge with full psychological fitness. Doesn't matter. They're using them to create a narrative where you're an unstable veteran who fabricated assault claims and manipulated federal resources to pursue a personal vendetta. Sanders arrived with worse news. Dr. Victor Kane just gave an interview, network television, primetime slot, full sympathetic treatment about how his family is being destroyed by false accusations. They pulled up the footage. Kane sat in an expensive suit looking wounded and sincere, his lawyer hovering nearby, his performance calibrated to generate maximum sympathy. I dedicated my life to saving patients, Kane said, his voice carrying practiced emotion. I've worked emergency rooms, trauma bays, impossible situations where every decision means life or death. And now I'm being destroyed by someone who couldn't handle the pressure of civilian medicine and decided to blame everyone else for her failures. The interviewer leaned forward with theatrical concern. You're saying Major Reeves fabricated the assault allegations? I'm saying she had documented performance issues. She repeatedly overstepped her authority, questioned experienced physicians, created dangerous situations for patients. When I attempted to address her unprofessional behavior through proper channels, she became aggressive and filed false charges to avoid accountability. She claims you physically struck her. I never touched her. What happened was a heated discussion about patient care that she escalated into physical confrontation. Security footage shows she was the aggressor in our parking garage encounter. I was defending myself from someone with military combat training who became violent when corrected. Elena watched the interview with clinical detachment, recognizing the strategy. Kane wasn't denying the confrontation. He was reframing it, positioning himself as the victim of assault rather than perpetrator. This is effective, Chen observed. Public opinion is already shifting. We're seeing polling data that suggests significant portions of the population believe Kane's narrative about government overreach and unstable veterans. How do we counter it? Elena asked. Truth, evidence, testimony. Morrison pulled up the congressional hearing schedule. The hearings start in 10 days. That's our platform to present facts instead of narratives. But Elena, you need to be prepared for the most hostile questioning you've ever faced. They're going to try to break you on national television. Let them try. Sanders' phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, and her expression shifted to something between horror and rage. Jamie Chen just died. Cardiac arrest from additional pulmonary emboli. Dr. Kimball did everything possible, but the coagulants in her system created too many clots to manage. The command center went absolutely silent. Jamie Chen, 26 years old, drowning in student debt, working nights to survive, showing kindness to a stranger when everyone else looked away, was dead because she'd offered to back up Elena's testimony. Elena stood slowly, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. I want every piece of evidence linking Kane Medical Supply to those coagulants. I want to know who administered them, when, and how. I want a chain of custody that proves this was murder." "Elena, Sanders began. "That wasn't a request, Colonel. A 26-year-old nurse just died because she tried to do the right thing. Someone poisoned her specifically to silence a witness. I want that someone identified and charged with murder." Chen was already pulling files. "We're working on it. Preliminary toxicology shows pharmaceutical-grade factor VIII concentrate, used medically to treat bleeding disorders, but in high doses can cause dangerous clotting. Procurement records are being traced now." "How long?" 48 hours minimum for full chain of custody documentation." Elena's phone buzzed again. The anonymous number from earlier. "Still want to know where Victor Kane is? Because he's about to disappear to a country without extradition. Last chance to stop him." This time, Elena didn't delete the message. She showed it to Morrison and Sanders. "That's actionable intelligence about flight risk," Morrison said immediately. "If Kane is planning to flee, we need to act now." Sanders made calls to Kane's monitoring team while Chen coordinated with federal marshals. Within minutes, they confirmed the anonymous tip was accurate. Victor Kane had just purchased tickets to Brazil under a fake identity. His electronic monitoring ankle bracelet had been tampered with, and he was currently en route to a private airfield outside Cincinnati. "He's running," Moreno said. "Knows the evidence is overwhelming. Knows his family's money can't save him, so he's trying to disappear before trial." "Not on my watch," Morrison said, activating rapid response protocols. "Get me tactical teams to that airfield. I want Victor Kane in custody within the hour." Elena stood in the command center watching real-time tracking of Kane's vehicle heading toward the private airfield, understanding that this was the moment everything had been building toward. A corrupt physician who'd abused power for years, who'd assaulted staff and endangered patients, who'd relied on family money to escape accountability, finally facing consequences he couldn't buy or intimidate his way past. The tactical teams mobilized with precision, multiple vehicles converging on the airfield from different vectors to prevent escape. Helicopter support providing aerial surveillance, federal marshals coordinating with local law enforcement to establish perimeter security. Elena watched it unfold across multiple video feeds, seeing Kane's black Mercedes pull onto the tarmac where a private jet was already warming its engines. Kane exited the vehicle, moving quickly toward the aircraft with the desperate urgency of someone who knew this was his last chance at freedom. Tactical teams emerged from concealment positions, weapons drawn, voices amplified. "Federal agents! Victor Kane, you're under arrest! Get on the ground!" Kane froze, 20 meters from the aircraft, surrounded by armed personnel, his escape route completely blocked. For 5 seconds he stood there, hands visible but not raised, calculating odds that any reasonable person would recognize as hopeless. Then he ran anyway, not toward the aircraft but toward the perimeter fence, moving with the panic of someone who'd never faced real consequences and couldn't process the reality of capture. He made it 10 meters before a tactical team member took him down with a contact taser, 50,000 volts dropping him to the tarmac, where he was immediately secured with professional efficiency. "Victor Kane in custody," the team leader reported. "Subject attempted to flee, was subdued with less lethal force, no serious injuries." Elena watched Kane being lifted from the tarmac in flex cuffs, his expensive suit torn, his face showing the dawning horror of someone realizing that money and family name weren't going to save him. Sanders turned to Elena. "It's over. Victor Kane is going to federal prison. His father faces decades behind bars. The corruption network is collapsing. You won." But Elena was looking at the empty chair where Jamie Chen should have been sitting, where a 26-year-old nurse should have been celebrating justice instead of lying in the morgue because she'd shown kindness to the wrong person. "We haven't won anything yet," Elena said quietly. "Jamie's dead. Martinez is traumatized. Dozens of patients were harmed by negligence we're just starting to uncover. This isn't victory, it's damage control." Morrison joined them, his expression carrying the weight of command decisions made under impossible pressure. "Major Reeves, you're scheduled to testify before Congress in 8 days. Between now and then, you're going to be the most scrutinized person in America. The Kane family's legal team will use every resource available to discredit you. Media will dissect your entire life history. Political operatives will try to turn this into partisan warfare." "I understand," Do you? Because once you step into that hearing room, there's no walking back. You'll be making enemies of some of the most powerful people in healthcare and pharmaceutical industries. You'll be threatening revenue streams worth billions. These people don't forgive, and they don't forget. Elena thought about the quiet temp nurse she'd been 6 weeks ago, moving through hospital corridors trying to be invisible, hoping civilian life would be different from combat. She thought about Jamie Chen's last text. We're winning. Don't stop. She thought about every patient who'd suffered from suppressed negligence, every nurse who'd been punished for speaking truth, every person who'd been crushed by systems designed to protect power instead of people. I'm not afraid of powerful people, Elena said. I've held dying soldiers while mortars fell on our position. I've performed surgery under enemy fire. I've seen what real courage looks like. And it's not billionaires threatening lawsuits. It's 26-year-old nurses standing up to institutional corruption, knowing it might cost them everything. She looked at Morrison, at Sanders, at the assembled team who'd fought alongside her. 8 days until congressional testimony. Let's use that time to build a case so airtight that no amount of money or political influence can make it disappear. Let's make sure Jamie Chen's death meant something. Let's prove that accountability is possible even against the most entrenched corruption. Morrison nodded slowly. Then we'd better get to work. But as Elena left the command center to begin preparing for what would be the most important testimony of her life, her phone buzzed one final time. Unknown number. A photo message loading slowly. When it appeared, Elena's tactical instincts screamed warnings she couldn't immediately process. The image showed a hospital room, empty, recently occupied based on rumpled sheets and monitors still displaying flatline readings. The caption read, Helen Carver, found dead in protective custody. Apparent suicide. Thought you should know before the news breaks. The people you're fighting don't lose. They just keep killing until everyone's too scared to testify. How many more will die before you understand that some battles can't be won? A friend. Elena stared at the message, feeling the implications cascade through her tactical assessment like dominoes falling in sequence. Carver had been in protective custody, federal agents guarding her, security protocols that should have made suicide impossible, which meant either the protective measures had failed catastrophically, or someone with access to federal detention facilities had murdered a witness and staged it to look like suicide. The same way they'd killed Victor Kane's father's enemies before. The same way they'd tried to kill Martinez. The same way they'd succeeded in killing Jamie Chen. Elena stood in the corridor of Fort Harrison's command center, holding her phone with the image of an empty hospital room where a terrified woman had just been murdered to silence her testimony, and understood with absolute clarity that this war was far from over. The people protecting centuries of medical corruption had just demonstrated they could kill federal witnesses even in custody, and the congressional hearing in 8 days was about to become the most dangerous testimony of Elena's life. Sanders was beside Elena within seconds, reading the message over her shoulder, her expression shifting from shock to cold, tactical fury. Get me the detention facility director on the line. Now! Morrison appeared from the command center, took one look at their faces, and understood instantly that catastrophe had struck. What happened? Helen Carver is dead, Elena said, her voice flat with the kind of control that came from suppressing rage to maintain operational focus. Apparent suicide in federal protective custody. Someone just sent me a photo. Morrison's jaw tightened. Someone inside the facility. Or someone with access to security feeds and enough connections to know exactly which witness to target next. Elena forwarded the message to the investigative team. This wasn't opportunistic. This was strategic elimination of the witness who could testify about administrative complicity in the corruption network. Chen arrived with preliminary reports, her face carrying the exhausted fury of someone who'd just watched protective protocols fail catastrophically. Carver was found 20 minutes ago by guards conducting routine checks, hanging from a bedsheet. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. Surveillance footage shows no one entering her room. Which means either she actually killed herself or someone made it look perfect, Moreno said, pulling up the facility's security protocols. But Carver was under suicide watch after expressing fear for her family. She should have been monitored continuously. Unless someone with authority changed those protocols. Sanders said grimly. Someone who could order guards to reduce monitoring without raising immediate suspicion. Elena's tactical mind processed implications with the speed of combat assessment. The same network that's been murdering witnesses for years. The same people who dosed Jamie Chen with coagulants and staged Martinez's kidnapping. They're demonstrating they can reach anyone, anywhere, even in federal custody. Which creates a problem for every remaining witness, Morrison observed. If people believe we can't protect them, they'll stop cooperating. The entire investigation could collapse from fear. Sanders made rapid calls to upgrade security for Martinez and every other witness who'd come forward. But Elena could see the fundamental issue. No amount of security mattered if the corruption extended into the institution supposed to provide protection. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a video call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost declined, then saw the caller ID, Dr. Sofia Martinez. Elena answered to find Martinez's face filling the screen, her eyes red from crying, her voice shaking. Did you see the news about Carver? They're saying suicide, but Elena, she was terrified. She told me last night that she'd never hurt herself because her daughter needed her. Someone killed her to send a message. I know. We're investigating. I want out. Martinez's voice cracked completely. I want witness protection, relocation, new identity, whatever it takes to disappear before they kill me too. I can't do this. I can't testify knowing they'll murder me the moment I'm vulnerable. Elena understood the fear viscerally. Sophia, if you run, if all the witnesses disappear, they win. The corruption continues. More patients die. More healthcare workers get crushed. I don't want to be a martyr for a cause. I want to live. Martinez was crying openly now. Jamie's dead. Carver's dead. How many more bodies before you understand that some enemies are too powerful to fight? No enemy is too powerful. They're just well protected. But protection breaks when enough people refuse to be silent. Easy for you to say. You're military. You're trained for this. I'm just a doctor who tried to report negligence and got my life destroyed for it. Martinez wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, Elena. I can't do it. I'm taking whatever deal the prosecutors offer, and then I'm disappearing. The call ended before Elena could respond. Sanders had been listening on speaker. She's breaking. Can't blame her after watching 2 other witnesses die. If Martinez withdraws cooperation, we lose critical testimony about the systematic suppression of safety complaints. We need to give her a reason to stay, Elena said. Show her that fighting back is possible and effective, that the corruption network is actually collapsing under legal pressure. Morrison pulled up case files. We have 14 people in custody, including Richard Kane, Dr. Patricia Morse, and Thomas Garrett. We have documentation of financial crimes spanning 2 decades. We have testimony from cooperating witnesses. The case is strong even if Martinez walks away. But it's not complete. We're missing the top of the pyramid. Elena studied the network diagram showing connections between corrupted institutions. Garrett ran MedSource International. The Kanes controlled pharmaceutical distribution. Morse coordinated medical suppression. But someone above them orchestrated the entire system, someone with enough power to corrupt federal detention facilities and order murders that look like suicides. Chen highlighted connections on the diagram. We've been following financial trails, shell companies, offshore accounts, consulting fees that look like money laundering. All roads lead to a holding company called Asclepius Strategic Partners, private equity firm that owns stakes in 17 hospital systems, 12 pharmaceutical distributors, and 6 medical equipment manufacturers. Who owns Asclepius? That's where it gets complicated. The ownership structure is designed to obscure actual control. Multiple layers of corporate entities, trusts, offshore registrations. But we've identified one name that appears repeatedly in board minutes and major decisions. Chen pulled up a file. William Hollister, former hospital CEO, current healthcare consultant, and according to financial forensics, the primary beneficiary of Asclepius's profits. Sanders ran the name through military databases. No direct connections to DoD or military personnel. Clean criminal record. Appears to be a legitimate businessman who's made billions through strategic healthcare investments. Or a criminal mastermind who's been coordinating systematic corruption while maintaining plausible deniability, Elena countered. If Hollister controlled Asclepius, and Asclepius controlled MedSource, and MedSource coordinated the Kane family's pharmaceutical schemes, then Hollister is the apex predator we've been missing. Morrison made a decision. Bring him in for questioning. If he's innocent, he'll cooperate. If he's guilty, his reaction will tell us everything we need to know. Federal agents arrived at Hollister's Manhattan office 3 hours later with a polite request for an interview regarding his business relationships with indicted healthcare executives. His lawyers immediately objected, filed protective motions, and made it clear that their client would not be speaking to investigators without extensive legal preparation. Standard wealthy defendant behavior that confirmed he had something to hide. But what they hadn't anticipated was the investigative team's next move: simultaneous raids on Asclepius offices in 6 cities, coordinated seizures of financial records, and subpoenas for communications between Hollister and every indicted co-conspirator. The operation was designed to generate maximum pressure and minimum warning. By the time Hollister's lawyers realized the scope of the investigation, federal agents had already secured terabytes of data that would take months to fully analyze. Chen called Elena with preliminary findings. We found communications between Hollister and Thomas Garrett discussing operational challenges and witness management strategies. Garrett reported that Elena Reeves represented a systemic threat requiring permanent resolution, and Hollister approved a budget of $500,000 for SOA crisis management consulting. That's code for murder, Elena said flatly. Almost certainly. We're building a case that Hollister directly authorized the assassination attempts against you, Martinez, and Jamie Chen. We're also finding evidence that he ordered Carver's death to prevent her testimony. Can we prove it in court? With time and thorough investigation, yes. But Elena, Hollister has resources that make the Kane family look like amateurs. We're talking about a man who controls billions in healthcare assets, who has connections to senators and federal judges, who can afford the best legal defense money can buy. I don't care how rich he is. I don't care how connected he is. Elena's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd made tactical decisions under fire and never wavered. Jamie Chen is dead. Helen Carver is dead. Patients have died from suppressed negligence. That man authorized murder to protect his profits. He's going to face accountability. The next 48 hours became a masterclass in federal prosecution against institutional power. Hollister's lawyers filed emergency motions to suppress evidence, claiming investigators had exceeded their authority and violated his constitutional rights. Federal judges, some with financial connections to Asclepius-controlled institutions, began granting delays and protective orders that slowed the investigation's momentum. But what Hollister's legal team hadn't anticipated was the public reaction. The evidence dump showing his communications about permanent resolution of witnesses went viral, generating outrage that transcended political divisions. Patient advocacy groups organized protests outside Asclepius-owned hospitals. Healthcare workers walked off jobs demanding institutional reform. Congressional representatives who'd received campaign contributions from Asclepius-connected entities faced immediate backlash from constituents. Elena watched the public pressure build through news coverage and social media, understanding that legal battles were only one front in a larger war for institutional accountability. Morrison called her to the command center for an update on congressional hearing preparations. You testify in 4 days. The Senate Health Committee has confirmed you as lead witness. They're expecting testimony about systemic corruption, witness intimidation, and the murder of healthcare workers who tried to report negligence. I'll be ready. Will you? Because Hollister's legal team has been feeding information to senators friendly to healthcare industry interests. They're preparing hostile questions designed to make you look unstable, vindictive, and unreliable. They're going to suggest you fabricated evidence, manipulated federal resources, and pursued a personal vendetta against the Kane family. Let them try. I have documentation, witness testimony, and a body count that speaks for itself. Sanders entered with news that changed the tactical situation completely. We just arrested someone trying to access Fort Harrison's security systems. Contractor working for a firm with connections to Asclepius Strategic Partners. He was attempting to identify your location and daily routines. They're planning another assassination attempt, Elena said, understanding the implications immediately. Before you can testify. Before you can speak publicly about Hollister's role in coordinating murders. Sanders pulled up the contractor's preliminary interrogation. He's not talking yet, but his equipment included surveillance gear, untraceable communications devices, and information about congressional hearing security protocols. They're going to try to kill me before I reach the hearing room. Morrison's expression hardened. Then we changed the security protocols completely. You don't leave this base until the day of the hearing. You travel in armored convoy with full tactical escort, and we coordinate with Capitol Police to establish secure perimeter around the hearing room. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Martinez. I saw the news about the contractor. They're really going to kill anyone who testifies. I can't do this. I'm sorry. Another witness breaking under pressure. Another person who'd found courage collapsing under the reality that speaking truth could mean death. Elena called Martinez directly, catching her before she could disappear into witness protection in silence. Sophia, I know you're scared. I know this seems impossible. But you're a physician. You took an oath to do no harm. Staying silent while patients die from suppressed negligence violates that oath more than any physical threat to your safety. My oath doesn't include martyrdom, Martinez said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. No, it includes courage. It includes standing up for people who can't protect themselves. It includes refusing to let fear override ethics. Elena kept her tone measured, understanding that pushing too hard would drive Martinez away completely. You don't have to testify at congressional hearings. You don't have to be a public figure. But we need your documentation. We need your witness statement. We need proof that the suppression of safety complaints was systematic and deliberate. And if they kill me for providing that proof, then we make sure your death accomplishes what your silence wouldn't: complete exposure of every person who participated in this corruption. No more quiet cover-ups, no more protected incompetence, just brutal, public accountability. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. I need time to think. You have 72 hours until the hearing. Think fast. Elena ended the call and turned to Morrison. We're losing witnesses to fear. We need to demonstrate that fighting back produces results, not just martyrdom. Agreed, which is why I'm accelerating the timeline for additional arrests. Morrison pulled up targeting lists. We've identified 47 individuals who participated in the corruption network. 20 are already in custody. The remaining 27 are about to have very bad days. The coordinated arrests began at dawn. Federal agents fanning out across 6 states simultaneously, serving warrants on hospital administrators, pharmaceutical executives, medical board members, and consultants who'd facilitated systematic corruption for profit. The operation was designed for maximum public impact, with media coverage showing wealthy defendants being led from luxury homes in handcuffs. Among those arrested was a federal judge who'd accepted bribes to grant favorable rulings in cases involving Asclepius-controlled institutions. His arrest sent shockwaves through the legal community and demonstrated that even judicial corruption wasn't beyond prosecution. By noon, the narrative had shifted completely. This wasn't about one nurse versus one hospital. This was about dismantling an institutional corruption network that had compromised patient safety across multiple states for decades. Elena watched the arrests unfold through news coverage, seeing faces of people who'd believed their wealth and connections made them immune to consequence. Now they were facing federal charges, frozen assets, and the collapse of careers built on systematic fraud. Sanders joined her at the command center. Public opinion is shifting fast. Latest polling shows 73% support for aggressive prosecution of healthcare corruption. Politicians who were defending industry interests are suddenly calling for reform. Even senators who took campaign contributions from Asclepius are demanding hearings. Fear, Elena observed. They're afraid the public backlash will destroy their careers faster than losing industry money. Works for me. Fear creates cooperation. Sanders pulled up new witness statements. 3 hospital administrators just agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges. They're providing documentation about how Hollister personally ordered the suppression of patient complaints that threatened Asclepius-controlled institutions. Can we tie them directly to the murders? Working on it. But Elena, even if we can't prove Hollister ordered specific killings, we can prove he created and maintained a system that made those killings necessary to protect profits. Conspiracy, racketeering, obstruction of justice. He's going to prison for decades, regardless. Elena's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. William Hollister's voice came through, cultured and calm, carrying the confidence of someone who'd spent 50 years accumulating power. Major Reeves, I thought it was time we spoke directly. This call is being recorded and traced, Elena said immediately. Of course it is. I wouldn't expect anything less from someone with your training. Hollister's tone carried no concern about surveillance. I'm calling to offer you something rare in situations like this, an honest conversation between professionals. We're not professionals. You're a criminal. I'm a witness. I'm a businessman who built a healthcare optimization network that generated billions in revenue and employed thousands of people. You're a decorated soldier who saved lives in war zones and applied those same instincts to civilian situations. We're both operators who understand that complex systems require difficult decisions. I understand that you ordered people murdered to protect your profits. That's not difficult decision-making. That's sociopathy. Necessary risk management, Hollister corrected. Every business faces threats. Every institution encounters people who threaten operational stability. The difference between successful organizations and failed ones is how effectively they manage those threats. Elena felt her anger crystallize into cold tactical focus. You're admitting to conspiracy to commit murder on a recorded federal line. Your lawyers must be horrified. My lawyers are expensive enough to handle recorded admissions that won't survive legal challenges. But that's not why I called. Hollister's voice shifted slightly, taking on a harder edge. I called to offer you a deal. One-time offer expires in 24 hours. I don't make deals with murderers. You walk away. Withdraw your congressional testimony. Convince the other witnesses to do the same. In exchange, I personally guarantee that no further action will be taken against you or anyone associated with this investigation. You'll receive $10 million in an untraceable offshore account. You can disappear, start over anywhere in the world, and never worry about money or threats again. You're trying to bribe a federal witness on a recorded line. I'm offering a pragmatic solution to an untenable situation. You've already accomplished more than anyone expected. Exposed corruption, triggered investigations, destroyed several careers. Declare victory and walk away before more people die. The only person walking away is you, into federal custody. Elena kept her voice level despite fury burning in her chest. You killed Jamie Chen. You killed Helen Carver. You tried to kill Dr. Martinez and me. You think offering money makes that go away? I think recognizing reality makes survival possible. Major Reeves, you're fighting against institutional power that's been entrenched for decades. You've damaged it, certainly, but you can't destroy it. The best you can achieve is becoming another cautionary tale about idealists who didn't know when to stop. Or I become the example that proves accountability is possible even against the most corrupt institutions. Elena ended the call and immediately forwarded the recording to federal prosecutors. Sanders had been listening on speaker. He just handed us conspiracy to obstruct justice, attempted bribery of a federal witness, and implicit admission of involvement in murder. That recording destroys any remaining legal credibility he has. Unless his lawyers get it suppressed as illegally obtained, Chen warned, already reviewing statutes. He called you directly, which makes it admissible. But they'll argue entrapment, improper recording consent, anything to keep it out of court. Doesn't matter, Elena said. Release it publicly. Let the whole country hear him offer $10 million to make murder investigations disappear. Let them hear him describe killing witnesses as necessary risk management. Morrison made the call to Justice Department Public Affairs. Within 30 minutes, Hollister's recorded conversation was playing on every news network, his calm admission of using murder as business strategy shocking even the most cynical political observers. The backlash was instantaneous and overwhelming. Asclepius stock prices crashed. Hospital systems announced they were severing relationships with the company. Pharmaceutical distributors canceled contracts. Politicians who'd defended healthcare industry interests scrambled to distance themselves from anything connected to Hollister. And most importantly, witnesses who'd been wavering suddenly found courage. Dr. Martinez called Elena directly. I heard the recording, Martinez said, her voice stronger than Elena had heard it in days. He actually tried to bribe you to stay silent about murder. That's unbelievable evil. That's institutional corruption operating at scale, and it continues until enough people refuse to stay silent. I'm testifying. Whatever happens, I'm testifying. Jamie Chen died trying to do the right thing. Carver died because she finally found courage. I'm not going to dishonor their memory by running away. Thank you, Sophia. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we've destroyed every piece of this corruption network and made sure it can never happen again. After the call ended, Sanders pulled up a status report on the congressional hearing preparations. You've got 12 hours until you need to depart for Washington. Convoy is arranged, tactical teams coordinated, secure facility prepared for overnight stay before the hearing. Capitol Police are establishing perimeter security around the Senate building. What's the threat assessment? Extreme. Hollister's organization is collapsing, but that makes them more dangerous, not less. Desperate people with resources make fatal mistakes, but those mistakes often involve violence against the people who threaten them. Elena spent the next 12 hours reviewing testimony, coordinating with prosecutors, and preparing for questions designed to discredit her credibility. Morrison ran her through hostile interrogation scenarios, playing the role of senators who'd question her mental health, her motivations, her medical judgment. You're going to be asked why you didn't just accept the severance agreement, Morrison said, adopting the tone of a skeptical politician. Why you escalated a simple workplace dispute into a federal investigation that's destroyed lives and careers. Because accepting silence enables abuse. Because institutional corruption continues when good people choose comfort over accountability. Because patients deserve healthcare providers who prioritize their welfare over profits and ego. Senator will ask, didn't you pursue this vendetta because you couldn't handle the pressure of civilian medicine after your combat trauma? My combat trauma, as evaluated by military psychologists, resulted in full fitness for duty and honorable discharge. My decision to report assault and negligence had nothing to do with trauma and everything to do with professional ethics. If the senator believes reporting assault is evidence of mental illness, I'd suggest they examine their own values. Morrison almost smiled. That'll play well on television, sharp but not defensive, factual without being preachy. They continued drilling scenarios until Elena could field hostile questions while maintaining composure that came from years of testifying under oath in high-stakes military tribunals. At 600 the next morning, Elena departed Fort Harrison in an armored convoy, 3 SUVs with tactical teams, helicopter overwatch, and coordination with state police across 3 jurisdictions. The drive to Washington took 8 hours with security stops and route variations designed to prevent ambush. They arrived at a secure federal facility near the Capitol where Elena would spend the night before testimony. Sanders remained with her, both as security and support. How are you feeling? Sanders asked as they reviewed final testimony preparations. Like I'm about to walk into the most important fight of my life. You've survived combat. You've survived assassination attempts. Congressional hearings should be easy by comparison. Combat has clear rules of engagement. Congress has performative outrage and political theater. I'll take enemy fire over bad faith questioning any day. Sanders pulled up the hearing schedule. You testify at 1,000 hours. Opening statement, then questions from committee members. Expect 6 to 8 hours total, including breaks. Some senators will be supportive, others will be actively hostile. Most will be looking for sound bites that play well for their constituents. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Morrison. William Hollister just turned himself in to federal authorities. His lawyers negotiated surrender rather than arrest. He's claiming he was misunderstood on the recording and plans to fight all charges. Coward, Elena muttered, showing Sanders the message. Turns himself in to control the narrative rather than being dragged from his office in handcuffs. Doesn't matter, he's in custody. The corruption network is collapsing. Tomorrow you tell the whole story to Congress and the country. That's victory regardless of how he surrenders. Elena tried to sleep, but managed only fitful rest interrupted by tactical scenarios where testimony went wrong, where hostile senators succeeded in discrediting her, where Hollister's wealth and connections ultimately protected him from accountability. At 7:30, she gave up on sleep and prepared for the hearing, professional attire appropriate for congressional testimony, her military decorations visible to establish credibility, her notes organized for quick reference during questioning. The convoy to the Capitol building departed at 900 with even heavier security than the previous day's transport. Capitol Police had established secure perimeter around the Senate office building with metal detectors, explosive detection, and tactical teams positioned at strategic locations. Elena walked through the security checkpoints into the hearing room where dozens of cameras were already positioned for live coverage. The chamber was packed with media, spectators, patient advocacy representatives, and pharmaceutical industry lobbyists, all watching to see how this confrontation would unfold. The Senate Health Committee members took their seats, 7 senators representing both political parties, their expressions ranging from supportive to openly hostile depending on their relationships with healthcare industry donors. Senator Patricia Morales, the committee chair, called the hearing to order. We're here today to investigate allegations of systematic corruption in healthcare delivery and pharmaceutical distribution. These are serious charges with far-reaching implications for how we regulate and oversee medical institutions. She ran through procedural formalities, establishing the scope of investigation and witness protocols. Then she turned to Elena. Major Elena Reeves, please come forward to give your opening statement under oath. Elena stood, walked to the witness table, and raised her right hand. The oath echoed through the formal chamber. Truth. Whole truth. Nothing but the truth. She sat, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the committee members. My name is Major Elena Reeves, United States Army Medical Corps. I served 3 combat deployments where I performed emergency surgery under hostile fire and held dying soldiers who asked me to tell their families they were brave. When I left active duty, I believed the hardest challenges of my career were behind me. I was catastrophically wrong. She paused, letting that settle over the hushed chamber. What I encountered at Mercyvale Hospital in Cincinnati was a different kind of battlefield. One where the enemy wasn't bullets and explosions, but institutional corruption that valued profit over patient safety, where incompetent physicians were protected because their families donated millions, where healthcare workers were punished for reporting negligence, where patients died from preventable errors that were covered up rather than addressed. Elena pulled out documentation, her voice strengthening. I'm here to tell you about a corruption network that generated $200 million annually by compromising patient care across 6 states. About assassination attempts against witnesses who tried to expose that corruption. About a 26-year-old nurse named Jamie Chen who died because she offered to support my testimony. About systematic institutional failure that prioritized protecting revenue streams over protecting human lives. She looked at each senator in turn. I'm not a hero. I'm not special. I'm just someone who refused to stay silent when staying silent meant enabling abuse, and I'm here to prove that accountability is possible even against the most entrenched corruption, if enough people find the courage to speak truth regardless of consequence. The hearing room erupted in applause from patient advocacy groups before Senator Morales could restore order. Elena sat calmly at the witness table, her hands folded, her expression neutral, while cameras captured the moment for broadcast across the country. Senator Richard Grimes, known for receiving substantial campaign contributions from pharmaceutical companies, leaned forward with barely concealed hostility. Major Reeves, that's quite a dramatic opening, but I have to ask, isn't it true that you were terminated from Mercyvale Hospital for documented performance issues and unprofessional conduct? I was terminated after filing an incident report documenting Dr. Victor Kane's assault and negligence. The official reason given was performance issues, but the actual reason was retaliation for refusing to stay silent about abuse. You claim Dr. Kane assaulted you. Do you have any proof beyond your word? Elena pulled up security footage on the chamber's display screens. This is surveillance video from the parking garage showing Dr. Kane grabbing me and initiating unwanted physical contact. This is footage from the trauma bay showing me performing emergency decompression that saved Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb's life after Dr. Kane declared him dead. And this, she pulled up additional documentation, is the toxicology report showing elevated pharmaceutical-grade coagulants in Jamie Chen's system, administered specifically to ensure the car accident that targeted her would be fatal. Grimes shifted tactics. You have extensive combat experience. Isn't it possible your military service left you with psychological issues that made you misinterpret normal workplace correction as assault? My psychological evaluations are part of the public record. I've been cleared by military mental health professionals repeatedly. Senator, if you believe reporting assault and negligence is evidence of mental illness, I'd suggest that reflects poorly on your understanding of professional ethics, not my mental health. Several committee members smiled at the response. Grimes's face flushed, but he pushed forward. You've cost hundreds of people their jobs, destroyed careers, damaged hospital systems that provide essential care to vulnerable communities. Don't you feel any responsibility for that collateral damage? Elena leaned forward, her voice carrying the steel of someone who'd made life and death decisions under fire. I feel responsibility for the patients who died from preventable negligence that was systematically covered up. I feel responsibility for ensuring Jamie Chen's death accomplishes what her courage deserved: complete exposure of institutional corruption. What I don't feel is responsibility for the consequences faced by people who chose to prioritize profit over patient safety and are now facing accountability for that choice. The hearing continued for 6 more hours. Hostile questions from industry-friendly senators, supportive inquiries from reform advocates, detailed examination of evidence showing the scope of corruption. Elena fielded every question with calm precision, citing specific documentation, referencing witness testimony, never losing composure despite aggressive attempts to discredit her. When Senator Morales finally adjourned the hearing, the national media consensus was overwhelming. Elena's testimony had been devastating, credible, and impossible to dismiss as the vendetta of an unstable veteran. But as Elena left the hearing room under heavy security escort, her phone buzzed with a message that reminded her the war wasn't over yet. Unknown number. A photo of William Hollister sitting in what appeared to be a luxury federal detention facility, smiling at the camera. Elena stared at Hollister's message for exactly 3 seconds before forwarding it to every federal prosecutor, investigator, and media contact on her phone. The arrogance was breathtaking. A man facing murder conspiracy charges, openly taunting a federal witness from detention, confident his wealth would ultimately shield him from consequence. Sanders saw her expression and understood immediately. He just made a critical mistake. He thinks this is a game he can win through legal maneuvering and expensive attorneys, Elena said, her voice carrying the cold precision of tactical assessment. He doesn't understand that he's already lost. The public has seen his true face. The corruption network is collapsing, and every witness he tried to silence is now louder because of his threats. Within 20 minutes, Hollister's message had leaked to news organizations who broadcast it, alongside analysis of his spectacular failure to read the moment. Legal experts pointed out that taunting federal witnesses while in detention on conspiracy charges demonstrated exactly the kind of arrogance that had enabled decades of corruption. But more importantly, the message galvanized the witnesses who'd been wavering. Dr. Martinez called Elena from her secure location with renewed determination. "I saw what he sent you," Martinez said. "He really believes he's untouchable, that his money makes him immune to accountability. I want to testify at his trial. I want to look him in the eye while I explain how his corruption network destroyed careers and killed patients." "You'll get that chance. Federal prosecutors are building a case that's going to take months to fully present." "Good, because I have 4 years of documentation about how MedSource consultants pressured me to suppress safety complaints. I have emails from Thomas Garrett explicitly ordering me to alter incident reports. I have everything they thought I'd be too scared to preserve." After the call ended, Morrison arrived at the secure facility with news that shifted the entire tactical landscape. Hollister's detention just got significantly less comfortable. Federal judge revoked his luxury accommodation and moved him to general population at a standard facility. Apparently, threatening federal witnesses from detention violates the conditions of his surrender agreement. "How's he taking it?" Elena asked. "His lawyers are filing emergency appeals, but the judge who made the decision is known for not tolerating witness intimidation. Hollister's going to experience what actual federal detention feels like instead of the country club treatment his money usually buys." Sanders pulled up status reports on the broader investigation. "The corruption network is fragmenting faster than we anticipated. 17 additional witnesses came forward after your congressional testimony. Hospital administrators who participated in suppression schemes are making deals to testify against higher-level conspirators. Pharmaceutical executives are providing documentation about kickback arrangements. Everyone's trying to save themselves by cooperating." "Which means the case against Hollister gets stronger every day," Chen added, joining them via video conference from the FBI field office. "We now have direct testimony linking him to orders for witness elimination. We have financial records showing payments to the security contractors who attacked Jamie Chen and kidnapped Dr. Martinez. We have communications proving he personally approved crisis management budgets that were actually assassination funds. Elena absorbed this tactical intelligence with the satisfaction of watching a carefully planned operation succeed. When does his trial start? 6 months minimum. Federal prosecutors want time to build an absolutely airtight case. They're not risking acquittal on technicalities. Chen pulled up the charging documents. He's facing 47 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and fraud. If convicted on even half of them, he's looking at life in federal prison. And the others, the Kane family, Dr. Morse, Thomas Garrett, all proceeding to trial on various schedules. Richard Kane's attorneys are still trying to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors aren't offering anything that doesn't include decades of prison time. Dr. Victor Kane is facing state charges for assault and federal charges for his role in the conspiracy. Dr. Morse is cooperating fully in exchange for reduced sentencing. Garrett is fighting every charge, but the evidence is overwhelming. Morrison set down a folder containing Elena's next assignment. The Surgeon General wants to meet with you. They're creating a new oversight office focused on preventing the kind of corruption you exposed. They want you to help design the protocols. I'm not an administrator. I'm a surgeon. You're a surgeon who just demonstrated that institutional accountability is possible when someone refuses to stay silent. That makes you uniquely qualified to help build systems that protect whistleblowers and patients. Morrison's expression carried the weight of command authority, making a strategic decision. This isn't a request, Major. This is an assignment that could save thousands of lives by preventing the next Mercyvale situation. Elena thought about Jamie Chen dying because she'd offered support. About Helen Carver murdered in protective custody. About every patient who'd suffered from suppressed negligence over 20 years of systematic corruption. I'll meet with the Surgeon General, but I'm not becoming a bureaucrat who attends meetings and writes policy papers. If I'm helping design oversight systems, they need to have teeth. Real enforcement, actual consequences for institutions that suppress safety complaints. That's exactly what they want. Someone who understands both the medical realities and the institutional dynamics that enable corruption. Morrison pulled up the proposed office structure. You'd have authority to investigate complaints, subpoena records, and recommend federal prosecution for systematic violations. You'd report directly to the Surgeon General with independence from political interference. Sanders smiled slightly. They're essentially creating a position designed around your specific combination of medical expertise and refusal to accept institutional bullshit. Congratulations, Elena. You just got promoted from whistleblower to the person who makes sure future whistleblowers don't get murdered for speaking up. The meeting with the Surgeon General took place 2 days later at a secure facility in Bethesda. Vice Admiral Rachel Thornton was 62, with the bearing of someone who'd commanded medical operations in multiple combat theaters before ascending to the highest medical position in the military. Major Reeves, Thornton began without preamble, you've accomplished something remarkable and terrible. Remarkable because you exposed corruption that's been invisible for decades. Terrible because you had to sacrifice so much to accomplish it. I didn't sacrifice anything that wasn't already taken from me, Elena replied. Dr. Kane assaulted me. The hospital retaliated. I just refused to stay silent about it. And in refusing to stay silent, you've inspired a movement. We're seeing healthcare workers across the country filing complaints they've been afraid to make for years. We're seeing patients demanding accountability. We're seeing politicians scrambling to address systematic failures they've ignored. Thornton pulled up documentation. But inspiration without infrastructure just creates more victims. We need systems that protect the people who speak up and punish the institutions that retaliate. What are you proposing? A new office within the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Healthcare Integrity and Patient Safety. Full investigative authority over any facility that receives federal funding. Power to subpoena records, interview witnesses, and recommend criminal prosecution for systematic violations. And most importantly, absolute protection for whistleblowers who report safety concerns. Elena studied the organizational charts and enforcement mechanisms. Who runs this office? You do, if you accept the position. Thornton's expression was carefully neutral. I know you wanted to practice medicine, not become an investigator. But Major, you're the only person with the credibility, expertise, and proven courage to make this work. Healthcare workers will trust you because you've walked through fire and survived. Institutions will fear you because you've demonstrated that accountability is possible. What about my military service? You'd transition from active duty to a civilian DoD position with equivalent rank and compensation. You'd maintain your security clearances and military healthcare benefits. And you'd have resources that make what you accomplished at Mercyvale look like a small-scale operation. Elena thought about the quiet night shift nurse she'd been 6 weeks ago, moving through hospital corridors trying to be invisible. She thought about the combat surgeon who'd spent 8 years treating casualties in war zones. She thought about the person she'd become, someone who couldn't ignore abuse, couldn't accept corruption, couldn't stay silent when speaking up might save lives. I accept, on 3 conditions. Name them. First, this office reports directly to you with complete independence from political interference. No senators pressuring us to drop investigations because they receive campaign contributions from the targets. Agreed. Second, we have authority to investigate any healthcare facility regardless of prestige or political connections. If Johns Hopkins or the Mayo Clinic are suppressing safety complaints, they get the same scrutiny as a rural community hospital. Agreed. Third, I want Dr. Sofia Martinez as my deputy director. She's lived through the retaliation and intimidation. She understands what whistleblowers face, and she's earned the right to help build the systems that protect the next person who finds the courage to speak up. Thornton smiled. Dr. Martinez contacted me yesterday to recommend exactly that arrangement. She said, and I quote, "If Elena's building the office, I want to help. Someone needs to make sure she doesn't just scare everyone into compliance without building actual support systems for traumatized witnesses." Smart woman. Brilliant physician who's been systematically underutilized because she prioritized patient safety over institutional politics. Thornton extended her hand. Welcome to your new assignment, Director Reeves. You start in 30 days, which gives you time to wrap up your testimony obligations and transition from Fort Harrison. The handshake felt like crossing a threshold from one phase of life to another, from combat medicine to institutional accountability, from surviving corruption to preventing it, from being the witness to becoming the investigator who protected future witnesses. Elena returned to Fort Harrison to find the base in controlled celebration. News of her appointment had leaked through military channels, generating responses ranging from congratulations to relief that someone competent would be overseeing healthcare integrity. Sanders met her with coffee and tactical briefings about the ongoing prosecutions. Richard Kane's plea deal fell through. Prosecutors wouldn't offer anything less than 25 years, and he refused. So he's going to trial in 3 months on 42 counts of fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. And his son? Dr. Victor Kane just accepted a plea agreement, 15 years in federal prison, permanent revocation of medical license, and full cooperation with ongoing investigations. His lawyers convinced him that going to trial would result in much longer sentences. Elena absorbed this with grim satisfaction. The physician who'd assaulted her, who'd endangered patients, who'd relied on family money to escape accountability, finally facing consequences that wealth couldn't erase. Dr. Morse, also pleading out. 20 years in exchange for testimony against Hollister and other high-level conspirators. She's providing details about how the assassination network operated, who ordered specific killings, how they made murders look like suicides. She killed Helen Carver. We know, and she's going to prison for decades because of it. Not as satisfying as a public trial, but it ensures her testimony helps convict the people who orchestrated the entire system. Morrison arrived with updates on the broader corruption network. We've now indicted 93 individuals across 6 states: hospital administrators, pharmaceutical executives, medical board members, consultants, everyone who participated in systematic suppression of patient safety complaints. Some are cooperating, others are fighting, but the evidence is overwhelming. How many trials? Probably 20 major prosecutions spread over the next 2 years. Some will plead out, others will go to trial and lose. A few might beat specific charges on technicalities, but they're all finished professionally. You can't come back from being publicly identified as part of a corruption network that murdered witnesses. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number, but the name made her pause. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb. Major Reeves, heard about your new position. Congratulations on turning a personal injustice into systematic reform. My team wanted me to tell you something. The night you saved my life, you were doing your job under impossible circumstances. But what you did afterwards, refusing to stay silent, fighting institutional corruption, inspiring others to speak up, that's heroism of a different magnitude. If you ever need special operations resources for an investigation, you know who to call. We protect our own. Webb. Elena saved the message, understanding that she'd just gained an ally with access to capabilities far beyond normal investigative resources. The next 4 weeks were consumed with congressional testimony, prosecutor interviews, and transition planning for the new oversight office. Elena gave depositions for 8 different trials, each one requiring her to relive the assault, the retaliation, the attempts on her life. Each testimony was exhausting but necessary, building cases that would ensure accountability survived appeals and legal maneuvering. Dr. Martinez joined her at Fort Harrison to begin planning the Office of Healthcare Integrity's structure and protocols. They worked 12-hour days designing systems that would protect whistleblowers while maintaining investigative credibility. We need rapid response capability, Martinez said, reviewing proposed protocols. When someone reports retaliation, we need to be able to secure evidence and interview witnesses before the institution can orchestrate a cover-up. Agreed. What about protecting the reporters themselves? Immediate temporary restraining orders preventing termination or reassignment while we investigate. Financial support for legal defense if needed. Psychological counseling for trauma from retaliation. And most importantly, guaranteed employment protection if their complaints are substantiated. Elena added another requirement. Public disclosure of all substantiated complaints. No more quiet settlements and NDAs. If an institution systematically suppresses safety concerns, that information becomes part of the public record. The healthcare industry is going to hate that. Good. They should be afraid of accountability. Fear creates compliance when ethics fail. Elena pulled up statistics showing the scope of preventable medical errors. 250,000 people die annually from medical mistakes in the United States. Not all of those are from corruption, but some percentage are from suppressed safety complaints and protected incompetence. If we can reduce that number even 10%, we'll save 25,000 lives per year. No pressure, Martinez said with dark humor. Just the weight of preventing enough deaths to populate a small city. Welcome to command responsibility. It never gets easier, but it matters more than comfort. The trials began in the spring, starting with Richard Kane's prosecution on fraud and racketeering charges. Elena attended as much as her schedule permitted, watching the pharmaceutical executive who'd believed his money made him untouchable face overwhelming evidence of systematic corruption. The prosecution called 47 witnesses over 6 weeks, each one providing testimony about kickback schemes, suppressed complaints, and institutional cover-ups. Financial forensics experts traced $200 million through shell companies and offshore accounts. Former employees detailed meetings where Richard Kane explicitly ordered the suppression of safety concerns that threatened profit margins. The defense strategy relied on claiming Kane was a dedicated healthcare advocate, whose aggressive business practices were being mischaracterized as criminal by prosecutors with political motivations. His lawyers called character witnesses who testified about his philanthropy and hospital donations. But Elena's testimony on day 32 of the trial destroyed whatever sympathy the defense had managed to generate. She walked the jury through the timeline, from her assault by Kane's son, to the hospital's retaliation, to the systematic evidence of corruption that investigation had uncovered. Mr. Kane didn't just donate to hospitals, Elena testified, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone stating facts rather than opinions. He purchased institutional loyalty. He used that loyalty to protect his incompetent son from consequences. And when that protection was threatened, his organization attempted to murder the witnesses who could expose the corruption. The defense attorney objected repeatedly, but Elena's testimony was backed by documentation the jury had already reviewed. When she finished, even Richard Kane's expensive legal team looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning guilty verdicts on 38 of 42 counts. Richard Kane was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. His pharmaceutical empire was dismantled, assets seized, and distributed between victim compensation and federal forfeiture. Elena watched the sentencing from the gallery, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was close. The knowledge that accountability had finally caught someone who'd spent decades believing he was above consequence. Thomas Garrett's trial followed 2 months later with similar results. The MedSource International CEO, who'd coordinated corruption across 6 states, was convicted on 41 counts and sentenced to life in prison. His testimony during the trial implicated dozens of additional conspirators, triggering new investigations and prosecutions. But the trial that mattered most, the one that would determine whether the apex predator faced accountability, was William Hollister's prosecution scheduled for early fall. Federal prosecutors spent 6 months building their case with obsessive attention to detail. They documented every communication showing Hollister's knowledge of and participation in witness elimination. They traced financial payments from his accounts to security contractors who'd committed murders. They compiled testimony from cooperating witnesses about his direct orders to permanently resolve threats to the corruption network. The trial began in September in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., with security protocols normally reserved for terrorism cases. Hollister entered the courtroom in a designer suit despite being in federal custody, his legal team consisting of 8 attorneys from firms known for defending white-collar criminals. Elena was called as a witness on day 4, walking through her assault, her investigation, and the attempts on her life with clinical precision. The defense tried to discredit her by suggesting she'd pursued a personal vendetta, that her military service had made her paranoid and aggressive. Major Reeves, the defense attorney said with practiced sympathy, "Isn't it true that you have a history of making life and death decisions under extreme pressure? That your military service involved situations where mistakes resulted in casualties?" "Yes. Every surgeon makes decisions where mistakes can be fatal. The difference between competent surgeons and incompetent ones is that competent surgeons learn from mistakes instead of covering them up to protect their reputations." "But you've had patients die under your care, correct?" "Yes. In combat surgery, some casualties are unsavable regardless of intervention. I documented every case, learned from every outcome, and never once suppressed information to protect myself from accountability. Unlike your client, who built a $200 million empire specifically to suppress accountability for preventable medical errors." The defense attorney tried several more angles before giving up and dismissing her from the stand. Dr. Martinez testified on day 7, providing detailed documentation of how MedSource consultants had pressured her to alter incident reports and suppress safety complaints. She described the systematic intimidation she'd faced for refusing to comply and the attempted kidnapping that had nearly cost her life. "Mr. Hollister didn't see me as a physician trying to protect patients," Martinez said, her voice steady despite the trauma she was reliving. "He saw me as a threat to revenue streams that his corruption network generated. And his solution to threats was elimination, either through intimidation or, if that failed, through murder." The prosecution's case took 9 weeks to present, calling 83 witnesses and introducing over 10,000 pages of documentary evidence. The defense strategy relied on creating reasonable doubt by suggesting Hollister was too far removed from operational details to have direct knowledge of criminal activities. But the communications evidence destroyed that defense. Emails showed Hollister personally approving crisis management budgets. Recorded calls captured him discussing permanent resolution of witness threats. Financial records traced payments from his personal accounts to shell companies that funded assassination attempts. The jury deliberated for 11 days, longer than prosecutors wanted but understandable given the complexity of the case. Elena spent those 11 days continuing to build the Office of Healthcare Integrity, preparing for the moment when the verdict would either validate everything she'd fought for or demonstrate that wealth could still purchase immunity from accountability. On day 12, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all 47 counts. The courtroom erupted in restrained celebration from patient advocacy groups and healthcare workers who'd attended every day of the trial. Hollister's expression never changed, the same calm, confident demeanor he'd maintained throughout, as though he still believed his appeals would ultimately succeed. But the sentencing hearing 3 weeks later removed whatever hope remained. The federal judge who'd heard the case had reviewed victim impact statements from families of patients who'd died from suppressed negligence, from healthcare workers who'd been destroyed for reporting safety concerns, from the families of Jamie Chen and Helen Carver. "Mr. Hollister," the judge said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral certainty, "you built a criminal enterprise that generated hundreds of millions in profit by systematically compromising patient safety. You ordered the murders of witnesses who threatened to expose that enterprise. You believed your wealth and connections placed you above the law and beyond accountability." She paused, looking directly at Hollister. "You were wrong. This court sentences you to life in federal prison without possibility of parole on the murder conspiracy charges, plus an additional 97 years on the fraud and racketeering charges to be served consecutively. You will die in federal custody, and your legacy will be as a cautionary tale about what happens when institutional corruption meets someone unwilling to stay silent." Elena watched from the gallery as Hollister was led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit and confident demeanor finally cracking to reveal the fear of someone who'd just lost everything. Afterward, standing on the courthouse steps surrounded by media asking for reactions, Elena kept her statement brief. "Justice isn't about revenge or punishment for its own sake. Justice is about ensuring that systems work for everyone, not just the people with wealth and connections." William Hollister spent decades building corruption networks that harmed patients and destroyed careers. Today he learned that no amount of money makes you immune to accountability when enough people refuse to stay silent. The reporters shouted follow-up questions, but Elena was already moving through the crowd, her security detail clearing a path back to the vehicle that would take her to her new office. The Office of Healthcare Integrity and Patient Safety opened officially on October 15th, occupying a secure facility in Bethesda with investigative authority over every healthcare institution receiving federal funding. Elena's first act as director was establishing a 24-hour hotline for healthcare workers to report safety concerns and retaliation with guaranteed confidentiality and protection. Within the first week, they received over 3,000 calls. Dr. Martinez managed the response teams, triaging complaints by severity and credibility, deploying investigators to facilities where patterns suggested systematic suppression. Some complaints were individual grievances that didn't meet federal oversight thresholds, but others revealed corruption networks similar to what Elena had exposed at Mercy Vale: institutions protecting incompetent physicians, administrators retaliating against whistleblowers, safety concerns being systematically buried. Elena's response was swift and public. When investigations substantiated complaints, she didn't settle quietly or negotiate confidential agreements. She released detailed public reports naming institutions, individuals, and specific failures. She recommended federal prosecution for criminal violations. She pulled federal funding from facilities that refused to implement corrective measures. The healthcare industry initially fought back with lobbying campaigns and legal challenges. But public support for aggressive oversight was overwhelming. Patients wanted accountability, healthcare workers wanted protection, and politicians couldn't afford to appear sympathetic to corruption after the Hollister trial's revelations. Within 6 months, the Office of Healthcare Integrity had investigated 47 institutions, substantiated systematic violations at 23, and recommended criminal prosecution in 8 cases. More importantly, they'd created a culture shift where healthcare workers knew they could report concerns without facing career-destroying retaliation. Elena received messages daily from nurses, physicians, and medical staff who'd filed complaints they'd been afraid to make for years. Some were simple thank yous. Others were detailed stories about suppressed negligence, protected incompetence, and institutional failures that had finally been addressed because someone with authority refused to look away. On a cold January morning, exactly 1 year after the slap that had started everything, Elena stood in her office reviewing case files when Sanders arrived with news. Mercy Vale Hospital just announced complete leadership overhaul, new CEO, new chief of surgery, new head of nursing, all committed to transparency and patient safety. They're naming their Reformed Patient Advocacy Center after Jamie Chen. Elena looked up from her paperwork. About time. What triggered the change? Your office's investigation found systematic suppression of safety complaints going back 15 years. Federal prosecutors are considering charges against the former administration. The board decided complete reform was preferable to complete destruction. Good. Elena pulled up Mercy Vale's corrective action plan. They're implementing mandatory reporting systems, independent oversight of incident reports, and guaranteed protection for staff who identify safety concerns. If they actually follow through, they'll be a model for institutional reform. Sanders sat down, studying Elena carefully. How are you doing? Really? Elena considered the question honestly. Exhausted, overwhelmed, questioning whether I'm making enough difference to justify the energy this requires. You've changed healthcare oversight for the entire country. You've protected thousands of whistleblowers. You've ensured that what happened to you and Jamie Chen can't happen as easily to the next person who speaks up. But it still happens. We get complaints every day about retaliation, suppression, intimidation. I can investigate and prosecute, but I can't change the fundamental culture that prioritizes institutional reputation over patient safety. No one person can change an entire culture, but you've proved that accountability is possible, that corruption can be exposed and punished, that speaking up can lead to actual reform instead of just personal destruction. Sanders pulled up statistics. Medical error deaths are down 18% in institutions under your oversight. Whistleblower complaints are up 300% because people finally believe reporting will lead to action. You're winning, Elena, even when it feels impossible. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Martinez. New complaint just came in. Nurse at Boston General reporting systematic retaliation for documenting physician errors. Sounds familiar? Want to handle this one personally? Elena stood, collecting her investigative credentials and security authorization. Tell Martinez I'm on the next flight to Boston. If someone's facing retaliation for doing their job, I want them to know they're not alone. That's why you're good at this, Sanders said. You remember what it feels like to be the person everyone's trying to silence. The flight to Boston gave Elena time to review the complaint in detail. The nurse, Christina Walsh, 28 years old, 3 years at Boston General, had documented a surgeon's repeated failures to follow sterile protocols. When she'd reported the violations through proper channels, she'd been reassigned to overnight shifts, had her performance evaluations downgraded, and received written warnings about insubordination. Classic retaliation pattern. The kind of institutional response that had been standard practice before Elena's office existed. She arrived at Boston General Hospital unannounced, presenting her federal credentials to the security desk and requesting immediate access to administration and the nurse who'd filed the complaint. The hospital's CEO, a nervous man in his 50s who'd clearly been briefed on Elena's reputation, met her in a conference room within 20 minutes. Director Reeves, this is highly unusual. We weren't informed you'd be conducting an on-site investigation. That's because investigations are more effective when institutions don't have time to orchestrate cover-ups. Elena set her recorder on the table. I'm here about Christina Walsh's complaint regarding Dr. Benjamin Torres and systematic retaliation for reporting sterile protocol violations. I'll need access to all personnel files, incident reports, and communications related to this case within the next 4 hours. We're happy to cooperate, but I should point out that Dr. Torres is one of our most respected surgeons. He's been here for 20 years, trained hundreds of residents, and apparently doesn't think sterile protocols apply to him despite overwhelming evidence that surgical site infections increase when physicians ignore basic safety measures. Elena leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to provide complete access to all requested documentation. You're going to ensure Ms. Walsh faces no further retaliation. And you're going to suspend Dr. Torres pending investigation of the substantiated violations. If any of those things don't happen, I'm recommending immediate suspension of federal funding to this facility. The CEO's face went pale. You can't just, I can. Read the statute that created my office. I have authority to suspend federal funding immediately when investigations reveal ongoing patient safety threats. Dr. Torres ignoring sterile protocols is an ongoing threat. Do we understand each other? Yes, ma'am. Elena spent the next 8 hours interviewing staff, reviewing documentation, and building a case that made Boston General's administration realize they'd made a catastrophic mistake by retaliating against Walsh instead of addressing Torres's violations. When she met with Christina Walsh directly, she saw herself a year earlier. A competent professional being crushed by an institution that valued reputation over safety. "I'm so sorry," Walsh said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I should have just kept quiet. I know reporting him was stupid, but patients were getting infected because he wouldn't follow basic protocols, and I couldn't just—" "Stop," Elena interrupted gently. "You did exactly the right thing. You reported safety violations through proper channels. The institution's response, retaliating against you instead of addressing the violations, was illegal and morally indefensible. That's on them, not you. But now my career is destroyed. They'll make sure I never work at another hospital. No, they won't, because I'm personally ensuring that your complaint is substantiated, that the retaliation is documented, and that this hospital faces consequences severe enough that other institutions think twice before trying the same tactics." Elena pulled out her business card. "You're under federal protection now. If anyone retaliates further, you call me directly, day or night. You're not alone in this fight anymore." Walsh took the card with shaking hands. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to one nurse at one hospital?" "Because a year ago, I was one nurse at one hospital being crushed by institutional corruption. Someone helped me fight back. Now I help others do the same. That's how we change systems, one protected whistleblower at a time." 3 days later, Elena released a public report documenting systematic retaliation at Boston General, Dr. Torres's suspension pending investigation, and the hospital's immediate implementation of corrective measures to prevent future violations. The report included Christina Walsh's name with her permission, transforming her from anonymous victim to public example of protected whistleblowing. The media coverage was extensive, focusing on how Elena's office had intervened within 24 hours of the complaint and forced institutional accountability that previously would have been impossible. Healthcare workers across the country saw the message clearly: report safety concerns and you'll be protected, not destroyed. 6 months later, Elena stood in the Office of Healthcare Integrity's conference room reviewing their first-year impact assessment. The numbers were staggering. Over 15,000 complaints investigated, 200 institutions substantiated for systematic violations, 43 criminal prosecutions recommended, and an estimated 32,000 patient lives saved through enforced safety improvements. Dr. Martinez presented the findings to their staff with visible pride. "We've fundamentally changed the calculus for healthcare institutions. It's now more expensive and dangerous to suppress safety complaints than to address them. That's a complete reversal of the incentive structure that enabled decades of corruption." The staff, now grown to 47 investigators, attorneys, and support personnel, applauded the results. Elena watched them celebrate, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: the certainty that her work mattered beyond individual operations. That evening, she returned to her apartment in Bethesda for the first time in 3 days. The voicemail light was blinking with a message from Lieutenant Colonel Webb. "Major Reeves, thought you'd want to know. The operation I was running when you saved my life just concluded successfully. Can't give you details, but suffice to say that some very bad people are no longer operational threats. Couldn't have happened without you keeping me alive that night. The team wanted me to pass along their gratitude. Also wanted to remind you that the offer stands. If you ever need special operations resources for an investigation, we're available. Stay safe out there." Webb. Elena saved the message, understanding that she'd built a network of allies far beyond her official authority. Military operators, federal investigators, healthcare workers across the country, all committed to the principle that accountability mattered more than comfort. Her personal phone buzzed with a text from Sanders. "Turn on the news. You're going to want to see this." Elena switched on the television to find breaking coverage of a congressional ceremony. The Senate Health Committee was presenting a special recognition award for public service, and Vice Admiral Thornton was accepting on behalf of the Office of Healthcare Integrity. "This office has accomplished in 1 year what decades of traditional oversight failed to achieve," Senator Morales said from the podium. "They've protected whistleblowers, prosecuted corruption, and most importantly, they've saved lives through uncompromising enforcement of patient safety standards. Their work represents the finest tradition of public service, using authority not for personal benefit, but to protect the most vulnerable among us." The camera panned to show a photograph of Jamie Chen displayed behind the podium, her young face smiling in what looked like a nursing school graduation photo. This award is dedicated to the memory of Jamie Chen, Morales continued, her voice carrying genuine emotion. A 26-year-old nurse who showed courage by supporting a colleague's testimony about corruption and paid for that courage with her life. Her death will not be forgotten. Her example inspired the reforms that now protect others who find the strength to speak truth, regardless of consequence. Elena watched the ceremony with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition that Jamie's death had accomplished what her life deserved. Lasting change, institutional reform, protection for the next person who needed courage to challenge corruption. Her phone rang. Sanders calling from the ceremony. Elena, they want you here. The award is officially for the office, but everyone knows you're the reason it exists. You should accept the recognition. I'm in Bethesda. There's no time. There's a helicopter waiting to bring you to DC 20-minute flight. They're holding the ceremony until you arrive. Elena almost refused. She'd never sought recognition, never wanted to be celebrated. But she thought about Christina Walsh and the thousands of other healthcare workers who'd filed complaints because someone had proven that accountability was possible. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The helicopter touched down on the Capitol grounds at sunset, golden light painting the building's white marble in shades of amber and rose. Elena walked into the Senate chamber still wearing her work clothes, practical suit, comfortable shoes, federal credentials visible on her belt. Senator Morales saw her enter and smiled. Director Reeves has just arrived. Please join us, Major. Elena walked to the podium, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes watching her cross the chamber. Patient advocacy representatives, healthcare workers, media covering the ceremony, senators from both parties, all standing in recognition. Vice Admiral Thornton handed her the award, a formal plaque recognizing the Office of Healthcare Integrity's achievements in protecting patients and healthcare workers. Major Reeves, Thornton said quietly, you were supposed to be a quiet night shift nurse trying to disappear into civilian life. Instead, you became the force that proved accountability is possible even against the most entrenched corruption. The healthcare system is safer because you refused to stay silent. Thousands of lives have been saved because you fought back. Well done, Director. Elena accepted the award and approached the microphone, looking out at the assembled witnesses to this moment. A year ago, I was assaulted by a physician who believed his family's wealth made him untouchable. I was terminated for reporting that assault and refusing to sign away my right to speak truth. I was threatened, attacked, and told repeatedly that fighting institutional corruption was futile. She paused, letting that settle. They were wrong. Because what I've learned is that no institution is too powerful when enough people refuse to stay silent. No corruption is too entrenched when victims find the courage to speak up and demand accountability. No amount of wealth or connections can protect you when the truth is documented, witnessed, and shared publicly. Elena looked directly at the camera broadcasting this ceremony. To every healthcare worker watching this who's seen something wrong and been afraid to report it, you're not alone anymore. Report it. Document it. If your institution retaliates, call my office. We will investigate. We will protect you. And we will ensure that the people who prioritize profit over patient safety face consequences that matter. She held up the award. This recognition doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Jamie Chen, who died for supporting truth. To Helen Carver, who found courage too late, but found it nonetheless. To Dr. Sophia Martinez and Christina Walsh and every other person who refused to accept that corruption was just the cost of working in complex systems. Elena's voice strengthened to command projection. This belongs to everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet, to not make waves, to accept that powerful people are above accountability. Because you're not powerless. Your voice matters. Your courage matters. And when you speak up, when you document the truth, when you refuse to be intimidated, you change systems that have been broken for decades. She set the award on the podium. The quiet nurse they tried to silence became the director who makes sure future nurses don't face the same choice between conscience and career. That's not heroism. That's just refusing to accept that injustice is inevitable. And it's something every single one of you can do when you're faced with corruption that harms the people you're supposed to protect. Elena stepped back from the podium to applause that lasted for 3 full minutes. When it finally subsided, Senator Morales closed the ceremony with a final statement. Director Reeves has demonstrated something that transcends healthcare policy or institutional reform. She's proved that individual courage can inspire collective action, that systematic accountability is possible when someone refuses to accept that powerful people are beyond consequence, that speaking truth, even when it costs you everything, can ultimately change the systems that silenced you. The ceremony ended with healthcare workers streaming forward to thank Elena personally, to share their own stories of reporting concerns without facing retaliation, to express gratitude for an office that finally protected whistleblowers instead of crushing them. Dr. Martinez found Elena in the crowd and pulled her aside. You know what the best part of this is? It's not the award, or the recognition, or the congressional ceremony. What is it? It's that somewhere tonight, there's a nurse or physician who's seen corruption and wondering if they should report it. They're scared. They're alone. They're convinced that speaking up will destroy their career. Martinez smiled. But they're going to see this ceremony. They're going to hear you say that protection is real and accountability is possible. And tomorrow, they're going to file a complaint. And we're going to investigate. And the institution that's been suppressing safety concerns is going to face consequences. That's the victory. Not what we've already accomplished, but what we've made possible for everyone who comes after us. Elena embraced Martinez, understanding that they'd created something larger than individual cases or specific prosecutions. They'd built infrastructure that protected courage instead of punishing it. Late that night, Elena returned to her apartment and stood at the window overlooking Bethesda's quiet streets. Her phone showed hundreds of messages from healthcare workers, patients' families, and advocates thanking her for the ceremony and the work her office continued to do. But the message she saved came from an unknown number with a brief note. I'm a second-year resident at a hospital where attendings routinely falsify patient records to hide errors. I've been terrified to report it because I need this position to finish my training, but I watched your ceremony tonight. I'm filing a complaint tomorrow. Thank you for making it possible to do the right thing without destroying my future. Anonymous. Elena typed a response. Your courage matters. Your complaint will be investigated. You're protected now. Welcome to the fight. She looked at the award sitting on her kitchen counter. Formal recognition from Congress, official validation of her work, public acknowledgement of everything she'd accomplished. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the anonymous resident who'd find courage tomorrow because someone had proved that accountability was possible. What mattered was Christina Walsh continuing her nursing career without facing retaliation. What mattered was every patient who'd received safer care because healthcare workers could report concerns without fear. What mattered was the transformation from being the quiet nurse everyone dismissed to becoming the force that ensured future nurses wouldn't be dismissed when they spoke truth. Elena Reeves had walked into Mercyvale Hospital 6 months ago, searching for quiet civilian work that wouldn't require the constant vigilance of combat medicine. She'd found a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemies were corruption and institutional abuse, where the weapons were documentation and courage, where victory meant protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The slap that had started everything was meant to silence her. Instead, it had activated someone who couldn't be silenced, someone with combat training, federal resources, and the absolute refusal to accept that powerful people were above accountability. They'd tried to destroy her career. She'd destroyed their corruption network. They'd tried to murder witnesses. She'd built systems that protected them. They tried to use wealth and connections to escape consequence. She'd proved that no amount of money made you immune to justice when someone refused to stay quiet. The quiet nurse had become unforgettable. The temp worker they'd dismissed had redefined what accountability looked like. The woman they'd assaulted had transformed that assault into a movement, and healthcare would never be the same. Elena turned away from the window, ready to sleep for the first time in months without nightmares about patients she couldn't save or witnesses she couldn't protect. Because tomorrow, she'd wake up and continue the work that mattered, investigating complaints, protecting whistleblowers, ensuring that courage was rewarded instead of punished. The war against institutional corruption would never be completely won. But every investigation, every protected witness, every accountability measure was a battle that saved lives and proved that speaking truth mattered more than staying safe. That was enough. That was everything. And it was just beginning.